Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is the second part of What if Luffy ate Yami Yami no Mai and became Dark King? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. While his expression remained unchanged, his complexion paled significantly before he took off after the three. Nenjin, Payman and Tamangi looked at each other before running back to town and hid under their beds. They were just kids after all. The port of the Syrup Island was perfect. In a battle sense, of course. A narrow road led up from the stone beach on a steep incline. Tall cliffs on either side left no room to maneuver and was an excellent vantage point for anyone at the top of it against anyone coming up. You sure they'll come up here? Zoro asked the slightly roughed up Usop, which he was holding in the air at arm's length. Naturally, he'd had to pound some sense into the boy. That had taken a lot of pounding. Yeah, Usop groaned out. It's the best place for any ship to land. That's good, said Nami, propping Luffy on a cliff wall. Now we just wait for the pirates to show up. Wait, stammered Usop. Of course we wait, said Zoro, unless you'd rather run away like a get back here. Zoro once more grabbed the boy's suspenders, forcing him to a halt. Nami rolled her eyes while trying to shake Luffy awake. I thought you said you were a brave pirate. Usop gulped. I am. I just lie. Zoro butted in. The lanky teen looked away. Nami had moved on to violent shaking. This is your one chance to prove to the villagers and yourself that you're not a coward. What do you say? Usop stared at her, her eyes looking into his very soul, searching it for a slither of courage, an ounce of bravery. I say, tomorrow will be just another day in my village, he said, his fearful look suddenly becoming one of bravery. Clack, clack, clack. He grabbed his knees and held them together tightly, earning looks from the two pirates. Hey, you try going up against bloodthirsty pirates and not being scared. Zoro turned to Nami and raised an eyebrow. Nami looked up at him while violently slapping her dead log of a captain. You're the exception, Zoro. Zoro looked at her for a moment before nodding and turning back. All we need to do now is wait here for them to invade. Usop balked. What about Kaya? Kuro's going to kill her. Nami shook her head. You told us yourself. Kuro's waiting for that hypnotist to do it for him. So right now her home is the best place for her. The boy wanted to keep arguing the point but kept quiet. Besides, she continued, we still have to wake this lump up. Smacko, my hand's gonna break before he wakes up. She sighed. Let me try, said Zoro, looking at Luffy and drawing his breath a little. Die. Hold it, said Nami, cutting Zoro off. You are not going to make me feel like an idiot by mentioning that and waking him up instantly. Mentioning what? Dinner. Dinner. Where? Luffy yelled, sitting up and twisting his head from side to side looking for his meal. Nami face-palmed. Zoro smirked. Now we just wait for them to arrive. Kamen. Yeah, Tamangi. How much longer are we gonna hide under your bed? Until the day after tomorrow. True to their word, the Veggie pirates had hightailed it back to town, diving under Payman's bed, planning to remain there until Kuro's pirates had left. His mother had wondered why they would do such a thing, but just assumed they were playing their pirate game again. This is ridiculous, shouted Ninjin, pulling himself out from under the bed and staring down at his friends with unseen eyes. We're the great Usop pirate crew. We shouldn't be hiding. Ninjin, we're kids, Payman explained, pulling himself out as well. And as much fun as it is playing and dreaming about being pirates, we can't do anything against an actual pirate crew. Ninjin shook his head violently. There has to be something. What do you think the captain would say if he found us cowering under the bed when the pirates come? Make room for me, replied the onion boy. Ninjin just gave the two a disgusted look and made for the door. You two do what you want. Me, I'm going to go do something. The captain may be a coward and a liar, but even he's going to help protect the island. The door rattled as he left. The two boys' eyes fell to the floor, absently searching it, hoping to find their backbones. The door timbers rattled again seconds later as the two ran off to join their crewmate. Mary smiled as he stood in the doorway of his mistress's room, sleeping deeply despite her pained expression. Sighing, he closed the door. Damn that Usop. What did the mistress see in that boy? He was hated by the town, trespassed on mansion grounds, was a notorious liar and and the only one who ever make her laugh. Not even Klahadore could manage that. He traversed the long hallways of the mansion before coming to the servants' lounge, a place where staff could relax and enjoy themselves without getting in the master's or any guest's way. Of course, with Lady Kaya being confined to her room most of the time, they had pretty much claimed the house's real and considerably larger lounge as their own. He found Klahadore the only occupant of the room. Strange, usually there was 3 or 4 others in here even at this time of day. He was looking over a long thin box. Oh dear, he said, drawing the head butler's attention. Mary, he sounded surprised and rather annoyed to see the lamb man. I see you found the present Kaya instructed me to hide from you. He walked over to Klahadore just as the man opened the box, revealing a pair of glasses with a tighter frame than the ones he had. They were a present to celebrate your 3-year anniversary since coming to this house. She noticed how your glasses kept slipping and had these made for why. Crack. The word died as Kaya's most trusted butler. The man who stood beside her through ill health and grievous lose, ruthlessly crushed her heartfelt present beneath his heel. Useless, he said simply, looking out into the sky, deliberately avoiding Mary's gaping look. What's wrong with you, Klahadore? That was a gift to Ms. Kaya to show how much she cared for you. He pushed his glasses up, earning an agitated grunt from the other man. I could care less for the gifts of a frail little wench, unless of course the gift was, oh say, this estate. Mary was going to retort when Klahadore looked right at him. His breathing became heavy and his brow sticky with sweat as what he guessed soon-to-be former workmate stared at him with his soul-piercing glare. Do you know why I haven't replaced these glasses on my own, Mary? Klahadore asked, stepping closer to the panting Mary, a liveliness in his eyes never before seen. I leave them to remind myself of who I was and what I can do. Lady Ka, SKLTCH. The dusk gave way to twilight, and twilight turned into dawn. Out of the range of even the keenest of sight, a boat bobbed on the ocean, creeping closer to the island with every groan of its timbers like an arthritic cat stalking a mouse. Jango stood on deck, watching his destination grow closer and closer. You men know the plan? He asked, never bothering to turn around. Aye, Captain, replied a burly man with cat ears on top of his head. Rush in, kill everyone and raise the town. Wrong, he snapped back. Rush in, raise as much hell as you want. But don't kill anyone. To hell with that. We've been coped up on this boat for days. I want blood. I want gore. I want to see grown men crying like children before I run them through. The sound of bones groaning when I bend their spines backwards until they break. I did not become a member of this crew to act like a schoolyard bully. There was a murmur of agreement among the crew at that. Jango still didn't look at them. So you won't do it. I can dig that. I just need to run it by Curo to see if he's okay with a change in his plan. The murmuring ceased instantly. The hypnotist smiled, glad to see that they saw his point. Meanwhile, back on the island, the Straw Hats and Usop were preparing for the invasion. As it turned out, Usop conveniently had a copious amount of oil at his home. He didn't have any use for it. He didn't cook with it, use it for heating, or treat anything with it. He just had it. Yeah. Okay, here's the plan, explained Usop, using his captain attitude. The Black Cat pirates were known to be as agile as they are bloodthirsty. So with this oil and the steep walls on either side, we can take all that away from them. Then it's just a matter of using ranged attacks to safely take them out. Wow, that's actually a good plan, said Nami. Luffy was less impressed. I still think me and Zoro could take them out no problem. Maybe even just me. Nami shook her head. We can't always rely on your powers, Luffy. You might not be there when there is a fight, and it won't be good for us not to be ready. That was the official version, at least. The truth was that she was terrified by Luffy's powers. The way the darkness gave off an unearthly chill that ran up her spine every time it passed near her. The unnatural way it twisted as writhed like it was alive, spreading over everything more like a virus than the goopy smoke it was. It was in complete contrast to Luffy's warm and carefree nature. He and that power seemed like the sun and the moon, two entirely different entities that from each other that should only met for the briefest of moments once in a lifetime. Luffy knew better than to argue with Nami, so he relented. Now we just have to wait. Usop nodded, crossing his arms and glaring down the cliff road, trying to look as imposing as possible. 3 hours later he was starting to get cramp. Yawn, where the heck are they? This is just boring, whined Luffy, who was sorely tempted to go back to Dreamland. Yeah, said Zoro, his own eyes threatening to close. We should have been able to at least spot them on the horizon by now. Usop was just as baffled. I don't get it. This port is the only port in use on the island that a boat of any real size can dock. In use? You mean there are others? Said Nami. Usop's eyes widened in horror as he realized his mistake. Oh no, there's an old port up north, gulped Usop. What? That's where our boats are. Why didn't you tell us before? Screeched Nami. It's not really been used in years. I thought since Curo knew the island he'd have them dock here instead of an old unused one. Nami huffed. That just means that no one would be there to warn the village before it's too late. Usop paled, taking off up the cliff then in the direction he knew the other port to be in. Come on, we have to get there before they reach the village, he said right before vanishing into the woods and from sight. Nami went to follow but jumped back when she saw that damned smoke explode from her captain, which landed her smack on the oily slope. Losing her balance, she desperately grabbed onto whatever she could find, which just happened to be Watto resting on Zoro's belt. Sadly, this didn't give her the leverage she desired. Yami, the self-proclaimed badass, crowed as the thief stepped on him up as he fell back onto the oil, using him as a perch to jump away from the oil. Sorry, Zoro, but I have to keep our treasure safe. She rushed up the hill, shying away from Luffy and going past him. Yami, he called after her. I can get us there in a second. No thanks, she cried back, rushing into the forest. He shrugged. Suit yourself. his darkness shoot upwards into the sky. It stopped about 50 feet into its ascension before widening for another tendril of darkness to blast out in the direction of where Luffy knew the ship was, going out of the line of sight. Wormhole. The blackness consumed him as he was pulled up into the sky and towards the port, leaving the indignant shouting of a minty-haired teen to fall on deaf ears. "Sigh, I'm going to kill that girl. We have arrived," shouted the acting captain as the Black Cat's galleon came to a halt. "Gentlemen, I give you full permission to go nuts." "Why," screamed the crew, raising their swords and guns as all the pent-up energy they had was finally allowed to be released. Feral growling emanated from several of the cat men. 2 even discarded swords and settled for a butcher's strap to sharpen their nails on. "Let's go turn that town to rubble," shouted one. "I'm gonna beat a bunch of people to bloody wrecks," crowed one, trying to work round the "can't kill someone" rule. "Enough," said one before jumping over the side, landing agilely and started racing up the hill, soon followed by the others, pouring over the side and darting towards the village, swords raised and howling like frenzied dogs. "Let's destroy everything." The one who said that found himself lying back on the ground seconds later as something hard impacted with his head, as with several other members of his crew. "There's someone on the top of the slope," pointed out Jango, gritting his teeth slightly when he saw who it was. Usop had retaken his commanding pose, this time holding what looks to be a child's slingshot in his hand and a handful of ammo in the other. He stared down at them with nothing but bravery and disdain on his face, his legs steady and his arms unshaken. He indeed looked every bit the brave warrior he claimed to be, minus the cheap slingshot. "You're dead, brat," one cat-eared pirate yelled before he went crashing to the ground from a slingshot volley. Jango's eyes widened slightly behind his glasses. He'd never seen the brat uncross his arms. "I am Captain Usop, and you will not take one step past me. Leave here if you want to live." Usop internally smirked as the pirates paused to consider his words. He just needed to stall long enough for Luffy and Zoro to arrive. He couldn't hold out forever with his meager ammo supply, although he was a little worried that he was the first one here. "This isn't where the boats were," said Luffy. In fact, this looked like an entirely different village. He really needed to see where he was going when he used the wormhole. "Okay, let's try this again." Darkness rose off him once more. "Go away, or my crew of 1 billion bloodthirsty giants will stomp all over you." The pirate's sweat dropped. 1 billion giants ... Kid, are you even trying to make a believable lie? 1 billion giants. "Everyone back on the ship," screamed Jango before he made a break for the boat. "He's lying, Captain." "What?" The hard-eyed pirate roared. "How dare you trick me?" Well, at least he fell for it. Usop thought meekly. "Men, I don't think Curo will mind if we turn this twerp into a grease stain." Maniacal grins spread all around when he said that. A little mutilation was just what they needed to take the edge off so they didn't go too far in the village. Usop gulped but held his weapon steady, as did Jango. Even from the distance between the two, Jango's disc drew Usop's attention, eyes shifting back and forth in rhythm with the pendulum. "When I say 1, 2, Jango, you'll drop the weapon and lay down." 1, 2, Jan, whack. Usop's eyes were torn away from the ring that made up his world as a wooden staff crashed into the back of his head. Nami lifted her pole off the liar's head, grabbing his arm and lifting him back to his feet, though he rubbed where a lump was quickly rising. "What was that for? You could have made my brains shot out of my eye sockets. You're lucky it doesn't fall out of your ears." She snapped back. "That hypnotist guy down there was gonna make you lay down and let yourself get drawn and quartered." "Hypnotist?" He looked back down at Jango again. He nearly palmed himself for not noticing before. He'd just seen this guy less than 24 hours ago, for pity's sake. You're an idiot." Usop stared at the ground, deeply depressed. By now the feline-themed felons had grown very tired of all the talking. With a yowl they raced up the road once more, frenzied looks in all their eyes. Nami stood her ground and readied her staff. Usop reached into his pocket and threw out what was inside at the pirates. "Sure, kill Inferno Caltropes." The metal spikes scattered in front of them, right in their enemy's path, just as Usop grabbed Nami's arm and pulled her back on the ground. "What are you?" "BBBOOMMM." Flame and earth scattered everywhere, as did several horribly wounded pirates before landing back near their captain's feet, broken, bloody and out for the count. Nami looked up from her down position, gaping at the large hole that had appeared where they threw the caltropes. "Smack. Stop doing that," Usop shouted, rubbing the back of his head. "Well, that's what you get for carrying explosives around in your back pocket," Nami countered. "Oh, so I was supposed to fight viscous pirates with kiddie weapons? I'm a coward, not a fool," Usop sarcastically replied. "Wow, who would have thought a weedy lying coward armed with a slingshot would actually be smart enough to bring real weapons to a fight? Got anything else?" Usop gave her a strange smirk. "Oh yeah. Meanwhile, we find that Zoro and Luffy both suffer from the dreaded Hibiki syndrome, an ingrained lack of a sense of direction. While Zoro, after finally escaping the oil, ran about the woods like an idiot, Luffy kept porting around the island. His own inability to determine where north was exaggerated by the fact he was looking for somewhere he couldn't see. He needed a bird's eye view to ... There's an idea. He make his darkness rise straight up. Anyone looking in that direction of the island assumed it was from a house smokestack. He teleported himself up into the air for a second, trying to spot the location. There, he said gleefully, before his powers shot out towards their destination. "NGH," yelled one of the pirates as something powerful impacted against his forehead, sending him into La La Land. Usop smirked and lined up another shot that was Captain Usop's sure-kill Death Star. "I have enough for each of you, and all it takes is one shot." The cats hesitated for an instant before pressing forward. To them it was a choice of a few dying or all of them dying when Curo found out they failed. Usop pulled back his slingshot and let more ammo fly, failing 3 enemies in rapid succession in the time it would take for others to fell one. Slowly he was pushed up the hill by them, being forced to give inch after inch. Even a few he was sure he had at least knocked out were getting back to their feet, meaning their skulls must be really quite thick. They were getting too close for him to throw any more explosive caltrops, and he tossed out his normal ones for these ones. "Nami, I'm no good at close range. I could use your help." Nami, against his better judgment, he found the girl creeping up the hill as quietly as possible. She turned around, embarrassed. "Well, I thought you looked like you were taking care of things okay, so I figured I'd only get in your lookout." The boy didn't have time to turn as he felt a sharp pain erupt in the back of his head, thanks to a crudely made stone mallet. To Nami's horror, he crashed face first into the ground, probably breaking that thin nose of his like a twig, blood pouring from his wood staining the ground red. The pirate grinned wickedly, showing 2 rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "Brat, you don't know how much I'm going to enjoy this," he said right before he lifted his hammer high above his head and brought it crashing down. Nami brought her hands to her mouth as the pirate continued to pound Usop's skull like a drum, each time the rock tied to the stick becoming more and more soaked in his blood. She tried to move forward but was caught by a pirate who grabbed her arms and pulled them behind her back. The others watched, most just stopping to watch the show while others kept walking up, albeit slowly so they could take in the delightful sight. After a few more blows, the black cat pirate let his hammer fall to his side, panting and satisfied that he'd gotten some of his aggression out. "Well, that was fun," he said, turning around to walk away, before a hand grabbed his ankle. He looked down in some amazement that the boy was still alive, conscious even. Usop, his face soaked in his own life liquid, panting and unable to stand, growled up at the pirate. "I don't care what happens to me, but as long as I'm alive I won't allow you to make today different from any other day in my village." "If a hammer won't do, then how about this?" said another cat man, bursting from the gathered crowd, a sword ready to flay Usop. Just as it was about to connect, the blow was parried by a pole ... held by another cat pirate. "No, I want to beat him to death," growled the pirate. Another stepped out, brandishing a dagger. "No way. I'm gonna slit his veins and hang him up to dry. Crush him, shot him, slice him, gut him, leave him." The pirates turned to the sound of the voice, not expecting the sound to come out of Jango's mouth. "You idiots have wasted enough time. Neither he or the girl will do anything to stop us, so leave them be. Or would you rather let Curo down and face the consequences?" That was all the encouragement that was needed for them to make a break up the hill, throwing Nami to the dirt and trampling over Usop like he wasn't there. "No," he shouted, reaching out fruitlessly, trying to grab onto at least one of the wicked men. "I won't let you destroy my village." Badoom! Out of nowhere, a mass of black smoke crashed down at the top of the slope, clearly covering something heavy, because the moment it hit the ground in front of the climbing pirates exploded, sending them all flying back. Usop's eyes widened in shock, while Nami's closed so she didn't have to look at it. The smoke, instead of rising, fell to earth, sucking into whatever mass it was covering, revealing a grinning straw hat boy. "El Luffy," Usop said in shock. Luffy just grinned wider. "Usop, next time you should just lead me where we need to go. Nami's the navigator, not me." Jango looked up at the boy. He was sure it was the kid he'd made fall over the cliff yesterday. Did he survive? Must have. That thing he did with the smoke could only mean one thing. "Captain," said one of the crew, lucky enough to have been at the bottom of the slope when Luffy crashed. "He took out more than half the crew by falling from the sky." "What is he?" Jango pushed up the bridge of his glasses and gulped. "No doubt about it. That kid's a devil fruit eater." "Dee devil fruit," another lackey stuttered. The Black Cats were known to be some of the most powerful and dangerous pirates on the East Blue. However, being the strongest on the Easy Blue usually meant being the weakest on any other. It was rare for a pirate in this ocean to have a devil fruit ability, and those that do usually go to the Grand Line as quickly as possible. A crew that made their living in the East could have a long and happy career without ever meeting one of these monsters. Jango bit his lip. There was only really one thing that could be done for just such an emergency. He just hoped he'd survive the aftermath. Lifting up his pendant, he called attention to his men. Meanwhile, Nami was verbally chewing up Luffy's inability to reach where the location fast enough, and futilely using his bad sense of direction as a defense, to which Nami only attacked him further by saying he couldn't even remember where the boats were. Usop meanwhile was staring at the pirate with wide-eyed astonishment. He'd heard rumors about men like him, creating earthquakes by punching the air, biting through steel and stone as though they were cooked meat. Seeing it though, that was something in a whole other league. "How strong are you?" he asked to no one, not expecting to get a reply. "I can take this whole crew if I wanted," Luffy said proudly, pumping his fist and getting ready for a serious brawl. Nami sighed but nodded. "Just remember, try not to use your power unless you totally have to," she said, picking up her staff again and moving into a fighting stance. Usop managed to raise himself up onto his feet by himself, pulling up his slingshot with him. "Why? If he's got the power, then he should use it. It'd save us a lot of trouble." Luffy shrugged. "Dunno. Something about relying on me or something. Let's just get this started." "Not without me," came a scream from the woods. Zoro burst out of the foliage, panting and gasping for air, two of his swords out in front of him and covered in drying oil. "What took you?" snapped Nami. "Are you kidding? You pushed me down the hill, remember?" he snapped back. Nami ignored him and glared down at the pirates staring at Jango's pendant swing. "Whatever, let's just focus on this, okay?" The swordsman grumbled but lifted his lowered sword, showing he was ready. Back down the slope the men were staring at the swinging object, the chakram on string going left then right, left then right. Captain," said one pirate while keeping his concentration on the chakram, "aren't you a little far away to be hypnotizing us?" "No, it's cool," the impersonator shouted from up on the boat, not wanting to take any chances after what happened last time. He shivered. He'd spent weeks looking like a mummy after that. "Okay, when I say 1, 2, Jango, you will be uninjured and invulnerable, and you will be superhumanly strong," he called out loud enough for the Straw Hats to hear. "He can't be serious," said Usop. "Hypnotism can only make someone believe what you want them to. You can't heal people or give them superpowers." "He doesn't have to," said Zoro, making the others look at him. "But you can make them ignore pain by making them believe they aren't and can't be hurt, and switch off the limits the brain puts on the body that stop it from tearing itself apart. He can do all that. Maybe I should ask him to join our crew." "Whack wham, idiot," Nami and Zoro said as one before getting back into their stances. "Okay, here we go." Jango gulped. 1. The Straw Hats tensed. T2. The Black Cats grinned. Jango. Click. It was that simple, like flipping a light switch. Their minds just turned off. The entire ensemble of pirates lost control of their own bodies as reason and fear were pushed aside to make room for rage and instinct. Their pupils vanished from Oz. Speech was replaced by guttural growling and snarling like the animals they were. More like dogs than cats, really. Each one of them moved about as if they were completely unharmed. Despite some of them bleeding profusely and having broken bones, they showed not a wince of pain. Some threw their weapons to the ground. One even dropped his cutlass and charged fist first at the cliffside. Bakoom. To our hero's shock, a massive fissure opened up where the Black Cat's fist and landed, running up the cliff face and causing a massive chunk of it to fall away. "Crap, they really are super strong. We're all dead." Clearly Usop was a little tense. "You two just get to safety. Me and the captain will deal with this, right, Luffy?" "Luffy," said Zoro looking at his captain. "Yhhh," yelled Luffy, who appeared to be suffering from the same white-eye disease as the Black Cats. Darkness exploded of him in waves, making Nami get away faster with Usop on her shoulder. Zoro said nothing. He did wisely backpedal away from the human black hole as his unrestrained powers lashed out at him and everything else. "Attack!" cried out the hard-eyed captain before ducking. Now here is why Jango hates using this form of hypnosis. You see, pound for pound, the human body is far stronger than most of us believe it can be without becoming one of those giant muscle men who make a living flexing in Speedos. We are actually capable of far more than we appear to be. That's if we were allowed to use our strength to its maximum. The brain itself imposes restrictions on the body, keeping us from injuring ourselves by telling us how much we can lift or how fast we can run. What Jango did was not just remove the restrictions on their strength, but everything. The Black Cats at this moment were more free than most can ever hope to be. The limits that kept all human beings from achieving their fullest potential was gone. Adrenaline pumped through their body in buckets as the brain's control on the adrenal gland was let go. Needless to say, it was this that caused the sudden berserkerism. They lashed out at everything. Some charged up the hill, others joined in on attacking the rock, while others, in an act Jango feared, starting punching fist-sized holes in the boat. "Stop, you idiots. Get them, not me," Jango crowed over the railing, not willing to show his face lest he be targeted. Luffy, on the other hand, didn't move. His powers, however, translated all the aggression and sensations of power he was feeling right now, reaching out and twisting through the air in ways that would make even the most cynical of people believe it was alive. Zoro had managed to run after Nami and Usop and pull them, drag them out of danger just in time as the Logia power shot out in all directions, down the cliff, over the trees behind him, everywhere, grabbing the berserk men and dragging them into the darkness with only screams of indignation before they went silent. It didn't stop there, though. It stretched out further. The bubbling and twisting blackness soon reached the black cat's vessel, going under and around it until there was no chance that anyone could escape its grasp. Jango jumped away from the black muck as it crawled over the ship. Everything started to groan as the wood was pulled into the mysterious place where all that touches the Yami smoke goes. The figure had already crushed into splinters before being pulled in. He had no way to escape, and the black smoke coming from that kid obscured him from vision. There was only one thing left to do. Shamu, BUJI. Just before the ship was completely drawn into the darkness, two shapes shot out of it, landing on a cliff which the darkness hadn't yet crawled up. One was a very skinny and obviously catty-looking man, wearing a black shirt covering a thin body and hunchback, a yellow bow tie and short shorts which showed off his hairy legs. He wore split-toe shoes like the feet of a cat, gloves with razor nails, and a pair of cat ears on his curly blonde hair. His counterpart unceremoniously dropped his captain from the fireman's carry. He was somewhat taller than the other one, and much bigger in the waistline. He wore no cat ears, but had his hair done in a style to make it seem like he did. He wore a cape as thick as a blanket over his shoulders, tied up with a collar with a large bell on it. He had a white version of those claw gloves on, the same shoes, and a pair on vertical striped trousers untied by a sash. He wore no top, revealing a body that, while fat, was rippling with muscle underneath. "That little smokestack swallowed our ship, Shamu," said the big one angrily, watching the black lump where the ship was quickly become smaller until the space it had occupied was flat. "Yeah, which means we're gonna have to teach him a lesson, Buji," said the skinny one. "And how do you think you're getting near him?" said Jango, the darkness continuing to spread. They stepped back as it climbed up the cliff, the smoke funnel growing wider with every moment. If it had been Usop's intention for this to go unnoticed, then he's failed spectacularly. Shamu waved him off. "You caught him in the hypnotism with the crew, right?" Jango nodded. Buji spoke up then, pushing himself like that. "Even for a devil fruit user, I'd say he's already went farther than what's safe for him. The kid will burn himself out and croak any second now." He wasn't wrong. Even those as powerful as Logia users had limits to how much they could do, which is why they couldn't flash freeze the entire ocean, or control every grain of sand in the world with a thought. There was, after all, only so much power anyone could control at once. Luffy's power was that of the endless darkness. He could create a cloud of darkness that could theoretically grow forever. The boy controlling it, however, could not. Controlling his power did, after all, require actual effort, more than what one would think. Definitely more than what he could handle in his state of mindlessness. "Ggghhh!" Luffy cried out, smoke pouring off him in all directions, his heart pumping so fast you'd think he was having a heart attack if the rest of his systems weren't going faster as well. His insides straining to keep going at a pace they were not used to. His skin turning redder and redder as blood pumped faster and faster. Shamu grabbed the back of his captain's collar as darted away to avoid the gloppy blackness coming at them. Zoro turned up the speed to avoid the void that was consuming the flora and fauna that didn't escape behind him. By now, folks from all over the island were looking northward, guessing there must be a fire coming from near the port and spreading to the forest. They fled south to try and avoid the spread, knowing they couldn't stop a fire that big. That is, except for a former butler and a tired young woman being led unseen by the butler to the south by three little boys out of sight of the former butler. More and more power continued to fly out of the teen, raising to the heavens and piercing the white clouds in a colossal black pillar. As predicted by the Catman, Luffy's power began sputtering, darkness spitting out of him like someone coughing up smoke. Slowly he lowered himself to the ground, his body crying out to keep going, pumped with enough energy and power to go on forever, but the damage that went hand in hand with it taking its toll on him even if he couldn't feel it. His muscles weakened, his organs straining. Finally he could no longer take it and collapsed on the ground, his overwhelmed body slipping into unconsciousness. The darkness vanished. Instantly, I might add, evaporated into thin air, along with several dozen trees, nearly the whole of the Black Cat pirates and their ship, none of them suddenly reappearing like some old cliché would have you believe, just gone. The Cat brothers and their captain slowly shimmied over to the cliff edge, peering over it to see if the coast was clear, the three growing wide-eyed at the sight, Shamu chuckling nervously. "See Jango, he wore himself out. No danger, and no crew and no ship either," the other two thought, seeing not a scrap of cloth or a splinter of wood to show that the infamous Black Cats had once been here. "Well, at least he's down. You two had better finish him before he wakes up." The two grinned, Shamu wickedly and Shamu stupidly. Jumping over the side of the cliff, the two landed without injury, Buji doing so while cracking the earth beneath himself. They raced at Luffy. Shamu set his hand in a knife position to impale Luffy while Buji leapt into the air again to crush him. CATASTROP. Unnamed knife strike. EOOM. YYYYEOOWWW. For any aspiring warriors out there who work with a partner, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't try to attack your prey using two different methods, like a hand through the chest while your larger-than-life partner is planning to crush the same person under his considerable weight. Cause whether you succeed or not, you'll still end up with something of yours being broken. Sorry, brother. Ryuji apologized while his skinny brother was rolling on his back in sheer agony. Sorry, you crushed my hand and broke my arm, you big. He bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. Ryuji wasn't the best when it came to words, so instead of further trying to console his brother, he turned to see the cause of the injury. Zoro was standing where a clearing of trees used to be, holding a panting Luffy under his arms. The swordsman also looked tired, pushing himself as hard as he did to get back to Luffy as soon as the cloud vanished will do that to a guy. Now Ryuji wasn't one for subtlety or tact. Seeing his brother was injured, he abandoned all sense and charged Zoro like a raging bull. The swordsman tossed his captain to the side where he landed with a grunt and drew his swords, bringing them into an X just as Ryuji's claws smashed into them. He went rocketing back a good 20 feet. He would have crashed into the trees if they had still been there. His arms felt numb from the sheer force of the strike the fat cat had unleashed. I'm gonna rip your head off. Ryuji snarled and leaped at Zoro, using his formidable leg strength to launch with the speed of a bullet. Zoro rolled out of the way just in time, not expecting someone so big to be that quick. Ryuji cartwheeled in midair, stamping his feet down as he continued to fly forward. He skidded only a second before he launched forward again. It wasn't all that difficult for Zoro to dodge the flying fat ball. He'd been training his eyes to be as sharp as his true goal. While he had to admit Ryuji was fast, he could effortlessly avoid him as long as he kept his eye out. The problem was that he couldn't attack back. Ryuji was cutting it to close for him to draw his swords. If I can't attack with my weapons, then there's only really one thing I can go, thought Zoro. As he dodged to the side, Ryuji once more spun in midair and slammed his feet into the ground, causing the earth to buckle underneath his feet. He snarled in rage, bringing his arms out in front of him with his fingers curled towards Zoro in an imitation of cat paws. He launched himself at Zoro again, his claws making the wind howl as they sliced it in two. Cat claw frenzy. Zoro pushed his left foot back, braced himself, and damn, the cliffside collapsed, chunks of rock falling around the two combatants, striking the Catman more than Zoro. It's hard for rock to hit you when you're already half buried in a stone wall after all. Ryuji and Zoro battled for dominance. The swordless swordsman hands gripped firmly on Ryuji's wrists while he tried against great odds to push his hands forward to stab Zoro's eyes. Zoro was working equally as hard to prevent that, and if either party tried kicking at the other, then they knew that the other would have an advantage and footing that they'd immediately exploit. Looks like we're stuck, Zoro commented, sweating slightly under the strain of holding Ryuji back. The black cat pirate, sweating just as much, sneered. No, you just can't get away. Shamu, Captain, the man on top of the cliff, and the one whimpering at the bottom sprang into action. Jango pulling out 2 chakrams from his coat and launching them just over his subordinate's head at Zoro, while Shamu gritted his teeth to bite back the pain and launched himself too, aiming under his brother with his good remaining claw to impale the swordsman in the gut. Idiots, Zoro muttered, before making his arms go limp. Ryuji was expecting Zoro to try and overpower him and jump out of the way, not to release him. He fell forward before he could catch himself, collapsing onto Zoro just as Roronoa had moved enough to exchange a facial impaling for cuts along the side of his head. Slitch, Buji. Shamu cried in horror as his hand tore into his brother's side just as 2 metal discs launched in his upper back. He didn't have time to scream in pain. Zoro, with a show of immense strength, pushed the not-quite-dead weight off him and onto his brother, who didn't have time to remove his hand from Buji's innards. The pain of the wounds and crushing became too much for the two and they slipped in unconsciousness. Zoro, seeing that his enemies were down, took time to wipe his hands over the gashes along the sides of his head, clearing the blood away so that it wouldn't go in his eyes and wiping his red hands on his white shirt. He walked back up the hill to where he'd thrown Luffy in the hopes that he could wake him. They still had one very big obstacle to overcome after all. Back on the cliff, Jango was acting like all of his screw had came loose at once, pulling his hat down almost hard enough to tear through it. This cannot be happening. He panicked. The men are gone. The Niaban brothers near dead. Kuro's plan is going to fail, and you know how I take failure, Jango. A chilling voice finished his sentence. A chill ran up his spine and froze his heart over. Turning slowly, he saw his worst fear standing at the top of the path, something that would have had him running for the boat if it was not already gone. Curo staring up at him with a frown. Now Curo wasn't one who appeared to get angry often, while Klahadore was seen to be happy. Angry or sad in the 3 years he'd been in the village, Curo wasn't truly capable of showing any of these. He could be giddy as a schoolgirl or as angry as a demon. Curo, whose face rarely changed no matter the emotion, with a frown, meant he was as angry as Garp when Luffy said he wanted to be a pirate. Not the best analogy, but there you go. K. All he could do was stammer, backing away as far as he could before his old captain's voice called out again. Don't move, he said plainly, without any edge in his voice while still instilling fear in his old first mate's soul. Jango froze on the spot. Call Captain. Curo interrupted again. Go to town, make Kaya sign the papers, kill her, and I may let you leave alive. He was gone before Curo could say may. The former captain turned to face the swordsman standing only a few feet away from him. Pushing up his glasses, he spoke. I recognized you the moment I saw you roar Noah Zoro. A bounty hunter and swordsman of great skill and potential. I had hoped that me officially being dead would have been enough to think of Klahadore's resemblance to Curo as pure coincidence, but it seems I was mistaken. Zoro smirked. Now you fooled us easy enough. Fact is that if you hadn't been blabbing to that wannabe hypnotist of yours where those two idiots could hear you, then we'd be none the wiser. Curo's lips tightened a half-inch. He was furious beyond reason now. I see, he said calmly, eyeing the swords between him and Zoro. You know I can't let you live, right? Figured as much. An uncomfortable silence filled the air, save for the gentle winds blowing and the loud rumbling snore emanating from the downed captain. The two men stood completely still, like statues for what seemed like hours, their eyes darting about in their sockets, looking for even the slightest hint of movement from the other man. A finger twitched. They both vanished. Ching. Steel met steel. Zoro's three blades parrying Curo's saber claws in the spot where Wado and his other sword had been just a moment ago. Curo's mouth turned upwards a hair. You're as good as they say, he said, pulling one of his claws away and raking them at the Santorio user's stomach with lightning speed. Zoro managed to jump back in time to avoid being bisected, but not without some gashes along his stomach and his favorite shirt being torn open. Not so bad yourself, he said clearly past the sword occupying his mouth. He pulled his handheld swords behind his back. If this guy was a cat, then he needed to be a much bigger feline tiger. Hunt. He struck with blinding speed, slashing the air with a blow that could cleanly cut concrete. Of course, since just air wasn't his intended target, he was disappointed with the result. Looking for me. Zoro turned around and saw Curo standing over Luffy behind him. The swordsman was impressed. He hadn't even seen Curo move that fast when he was getting his swords. Curo pushed up his glasses once more, using his palms as usual so he doesn't cut himself with his blades. The tiger was taught everything it knows by the cat, but not everything the cat knows. Curo vanished. Zoro looked around carefully, gritting down even harder on his third sword while putting his others in defensive positions around his back and chest. The only indication that Curo was anywhere was a faint booming sound, like the ones Buji made when he landed from his power charges, only much quieter and with no damage to the ground. He keeps getting faster. I don't know which direction he's attacking from, so I need to strike out in every direction at once. He moved over to Luffy, not taking any chances should Curo decide he wanted to finish the captain in his next pass. The wind kicked up. Dragon Twister. Zoro became a literal whirlwind of slashes as he spun around a full 360 degrees, creating a small funnel of wind that reached the tops of trees. He was a blur of whirling steel, slashing in every which way that he could for even just the possibility that Curo was there. He stopped only moments after using the technique. He stopped and looked around, slightly dizzy from using the technique, but no worse for wear than what he already was. Nice try. Zoro looked up in horror to see the butler rapidly descending towards him from up in the air, right hand thrust out while he dived down. Zoro moved his sword to defend himself and the person at his feet, but only succeeded in defending one of those two things. Curo's first hand strike met with Wado and his other two katakana. He curled his fingers to lock them in place before lashing out with his other claw, this attack hitting its mark and leaving horrible bloody gashes down his chest. "J-H-H-H," Zoro cried out, fire erupting across his front as it was sliced open like a holiday bird. Curo leaped back a distance so not to get any blood on himself. After 3 years he had a thing about cleanliness. His hairline smile grew another fraction as he swept a few loose hairs back in their proper place. I haven't felt this excited in years, roared Noah Zoro. Maybe there was something I missed from my days as a pirate. Zoro fell, dropping his two nameless katanas and clutching his bleeding chest, gasping for air as the taste of copper built in his mouth. He stared up at Curo just as he was sent flying back 6 feet from a blurring kick from the former butler, sending him from consciousness. Seeing the immediate threat was over, Curo turned his attention to the one Zoro had been so determined to guard. The boy was clearly exhausted. Even unconscious, he was gulping down air. Great patches of skin were blotchy from what he could likely guess was from bursting blood vessels, a common side effect from Jango's strengthening hypnosis. And with the sudden appearance and disappearance of the black smoke, he could likely guess that the boy had some sort of devil fruit ability. I can't risk someone with a power trying to fight me, Curo said, drawing his claws up to point at Luffy. Die, he said and thrust his hand forward. Luffy's eyes flung open. Geez, what the heck's going on back there? Usop said, leaning on Nami as the two of them made their way back to town. Both were injured, Usop more so since he was bleeding profusely. Knowing Luffy, he's probably won the fight by now. said Nami, who against Usop's protest picked up the pace. If that's true, then why don't we go back? Nami shook her head. We'd only get in the way. The only thing that stopped Luffy from using his powers like this last time was that he didn't want to damage the place around him. Plus, we'd be no match for those pirates anyway. The boy didn't make a comment. That is until he saw a certain someone dash out of what was left of the woods. His eyes bugged out at the sight of Jango running out of the woods as though the hounds of hell were after him. A terrified look on his face and his hands each holding a razor disc. Nami, look, he pointed, catching the girl's attention. That hypnotist creep. Yeah, and I bet he's going to go try to find Kaya, Usop said. He pulled his arm back from over Nami's neck and chased after him. Usop, the navigator called after him. Sighing in frustration, she chased after him at a much slower pace. For a normally spineless jellyfish, he could run like a wildcat. The world streaked around Jango as he ran faster than he ever believed possible, heading directly for the mansion in Syrup Village without even the smallest consideration that someone might see him. They'd think him a pirate who tried to steal from what was obviously the richest family on the island and killed the owner in the process. Failure for him was not an option. He zoomed through the town, knocking over anything and anyone who got in his way. He was moving so fast that he didn't even hear the sounds of indignation that those he knocked down made. Reaching the manor within minutes of entering town, he hopped the gates and kicked open the door, determined to find the girl by any means necessary. Usop was not far behind, literally on the heels of the pirate, heading straight for the mansion too, ignoring the cries of indignation or the angry villagers baying for his blood for some reason. It didn't matter as he was already at the mansion gates, climbing over them with the grace of a monkey and going over them in seconds before running around the side of the mansion, knowing exactly where to go to find Kaya. Where is she? Jango said in anger and fear. Anger because he was kicking down every door he could find to find no one there except for a goat man who looked to be fighting for his life, and fear because if he didn't do the job, Curo would turn him into a scratching post. Why do mansions have to have so many rooms anyway? Couldn't they just have one giant room to put everything in? It'd certainly make his job a lot easier. He came to the last door. Okay, the captain, Klahadore said that her room was on the first floor and this is the last door. So, once more his heel met the door, the spindly legs making the wood explode from the hinges and crash into the middle of the room. All right, time to sure kill lead star. 1 second the hypnotist was standing there. The next he was laying against the hallway wall with a large bruise forming dead center of his head. Usop grinned as he saw the pirate captain slide down the wall. He didn't know where Kaya was, but he could only guess that she'd left with the rest of the residents, which explains why no one came out to greet him when he ran through town. You need to change that attack's name, kid, Jango said in an agitated and pained voice, getting up and rushing the sharpshooter, catching the boy and slamming him into a wall before he could reload his slingshot. Usop grunted in pain but didn't let his legs give way. Grabbing his foe by his midsection, he heaved him up before collapsing to the ground, delivering a pile driver. AGHFK, cried out Jango, getting up quickly and grabbing his head in one hand while holding out a chakram with the other, his anger growing when he felt that his favorite hat had been crushed in that desperate move. Looking around, he saw no trace of the girl. The bed was still untucked, which meant she either had some servant do that for her, or she'd had to leave before someone could fix it. Where's the girl, you little ST? He was really getting angry. Usop just smirked. I've hidden her somewhere, you'll never find her. Jango was about to yell at him when he remembered earlier. So you don't know either then? The look that passed over Usop's face was enough evidence for him. His anger lessened and he smirked. Please, you think I'd fall for your lies twice? I'm not an idiot. Usop sat there with a razor blade poised to lop his head off. Yeah, I guess it was kind of foolish to think I could outsmart someone as brilliant as you. Jango nodded yes. Brilliant. No one had ever called him that before. The most he'd gotten as a compliment was useful. The long-nosed boy nodded. Of course. You are the successor of the Great Thousand Plan, Curo, right? That would mean you had to be some sort of genius. Jango couldn't help but puff up his chest in pride. It was pleasant to receive praise when he normally got none. You know, kid, maybe I misjudged you. Tell you what, how about you get out of here and I act like you never ran across me? How does that sound? Kid. He looked back down from the ceiling to see a slightly bloody wall and floor where Usop once was, with small droplets leading around him and out into the house. FFFKKK. He ran out the room and into the hall, only to find the boy with his slingshot already pulled back. So long, stupid. Sure kill Iron Cactus Star, he cried out before releasing the ball. Jango was prepared this time. He released one of his discs at the ball, hoping it would cut through it and the boy's skull like rice paper. The blade contacted the sphere in the space of a fraction of a second and did cut through it, but the second it did, it exploded. From the explosion came dozens of tiny razor iron fragments. The explosion and new force going against it, knocking the disc, of course, and hitting a wall while the shards shot forward, striking everything directly in front of Usop. Jango didn't have time to duck away as more than half the shards hit him. He cried out in pain as he was sliced to ribbons by the metal slithers. His cloths were shredded and every part of his body was riddled. In the span of a few seconds, the somewhat feared 1-2 Jango was filled with more holes than Swiss cheese. He collapsed onto his backside after fighting himself to fall to his shrapnel-encrusted knees, his skin on fire, and he was struggling not to scream, mostly because several shards are stuck in his throat. Usop looked at his enemy with some small amount of horror. He never imagined he'd actually had to use such a weapon as his iron cactus star before, but made it in case pirates really did invade someday. The state he was in, though, it was horrible. Jango coughed up a glob of globe and lifted his hand and dropped the string around his other chakram, swinging it back and forth. Usop was about to chastise the pirate for thinking he was stupid when he saw Jango take off his hat and look directly at the pendant. When I saw Jango, just Jango, all my wounds will be gone, and I will be superhuman, he managed to say past the blood. No, Usop reached into his ammo bag to pull out another iron cactus star, but it was too late. Jango, infuriating upstart, Curo grumbled, dodging tendrils of darkness as if they were coming at him with the speed of tottering infants. Luffy was nowhere near the level he normally could reach. That earlier stunt had put too much strain on his body and had for now severely limited how much he could create and control. A smoky aura poured from around his back and his upper arms, preventing Curo from a sneak attack. But the darkness wasn't moving anywhere near as fast as he wanted it to, or spreading as much, which was a big downside when your opponent's greatest weapon was speed. He couldn't pull him in either. The finger blades would slice him before he could lay a hand on the bespectacled man. You seem to be at a disadvantage, Straw Hat, Curo said, reappearing a distance away. I cannot yet get near you and you can't get close to me. Luffy, who was still trying to lift himself off the ground fighting his strain, sneered at Curo. I won't stop until I beat you, you phony pirate. He held up a hand as darkness started to pull around it. Curo pushed him. Glasses up, call me what you will. I couldn't care less about the ramblings of a starry-eyed boy who has yet to experience how loathsome an outlaw's life is. He bent over into a bowing position, his arms going limp. And unlike you, boy, I have not yet to fight at my full potential. Your smoke is quick and is spread around enough to provide a good if imperfect defense. Your injuries limit your power and you need to keep yourself uncovered enough to see me after all. Luffy growled. Normally I don't need to move this quickly, but since your powers make you more troublesome than anyone I've faced, I think I will make an exception. Out of the bag. Sure kill lead star. GGRRAAGGHHH. Deadly Fang star. GGRRAAGGHHH. Surefire ultimate Disructo star of Super Doom. GGRRAAGGHHH. GAH. Go down already. Usop was running for his life from the almost mindless berserker that Jango had turned himself into, running through the house as the hypnotized hypnotist plowed through walls and carved up the house, chasing after the teen while acting like a wild animal on the hunt. Usop fired back. He'd emptied nearly his entire bag of everything he had, from actual weapons to rubber bands and the ketchup ones he'd made for training with the kids. I've only got about 2 shots left. I have to make them count. Not that his last shots didn't count, though. Jango was running on pure adrenaline and what he could only guess to be about 2 pints of blood that wasn't on the floor. He rounded a corner sharply just as Jango caught up to him, plowing through a wall after not remembering to brake. This gave Usop enough time to load his second-to-last shot. He pulled the elastic back just as the berserker rounded on him. Demon Eye Star. He let go of the elastic, letting the sphere filled with a special mix of mace, poison ivy, and chili powder smash across in Jango's already broken frames and go into his eyes. GGGRRRRAAGGHHH. The reaction was no different than the others. Since he couldn't feel pain at the moment, it was a sure thing that you could rip his arm off and he wouldn't feel it. However, it was definitely having an effect. His eyes turned blazing red and his vision was reduced to a blur. Good. That should give me time to WWHHAMM. It didn't. Even mindless and blind Jango could still hone in on Usop's unusually high-pitched voice. The older man rushed at the sound and with one devastating blow sent the already injured liar crashing through 2 walls. T.T.T.EHH. Ooh, it was nothing short of a miracle that he wasn't unconscious. Wounds that had only stopped bleeding ran red once more. The large black spot in his field of vision wasn't a good sign either, and if he guessed right he could feel a faint crackle that he was sure was coming from him as he moved. He have so slowly rolled off his back and onto his hands, hoping that this time the blinding did its purpose and bought him precious moments. He reached into his ammo bag and pulled out another sphere. His last sphere. Turning his head, he could see Jango look around madly for him, his head snapping from side to side in desperation to continue his assault. Okay, now he just needed his slingshot. His slingshot was 15 feet in front of him. Jango was 25 feet in front of him. Why is nothing ever easy? He groaned in his mind before making a dash for it, the sound of the charge attracting Jango's attention. RRRAAGGGHHH. The berserker charged at the moving blurry shape, shoulder, cliff, rock, thigh, dirt, stomach. Curo had no idea what he was slashing at. He just raked his claws out in front of him like a child swings his arms when charging someone he wants to beat up, the world moving around him in nothing more than a blur. At this speed he couldn't make out even the smallest amount of detail. All he could do was make a rough guess as to the space he was supposed to be moving in and hope his attacks hit their mark. He couldn't tell if they did or not because blood was literally sliding off his blades from the sheer speed. Luffy was having sight problems too. Namely, how could he fight something he couldn't see? If he was at full strength instead of the fraction he was at, he could easily take this guy down. Just reach out everywhere and stop him in his tracks. YAGH. Another gash opened along his arm. This time it was pretty deep. No time to think about pain. The smoke rising off him began to recall back into its origin point, instead doing the scientifically impossible and going downwards, spreading across the ground as thinly and as far as it could go, a whopping 3 feet in diameter. Yami Yami, both of them bleeding, battered and bruised, ran at each other, with the only difference being that one felt as he should in that condition while the other felt fresh as a daisy. Usop pumped his legs with all the strength he had left, matching Jango's longer stride. He dove for his slingshot just as Jango passed it, escaping a viscous haymaker which would have turned his brains to jelly by centimeters. He fell back to the floor and grabbed it. Oh come on. Rolling in some glass and other debris, he quickly loaded his final weapon into his slingshot and aimed right for Jango's head. Ultimate sure kill. Crush. The ground under the sludgy smoke suddenly cracked as the pressure of 100 times normal gravity descended on it. It didn't take long for Curo to try and make another pass at him, and WOAH. The former pirate stopped in his tracks the instant he stepped in the darkness, his foot suddenly weighing hundreds of pounds and his claws brushing past Luffy, scratching up the arm attached to the fist, filling his vision. No, my plan, my peace. If you wanted peace you shouldn't have been a pirate at all, declared Luffy just as his knuckles made contact with Curo's front teeth. Wabam! The great and feared Curo of the Thousand Plan. Once Klahadore, the loyal butler, now Curo again, was sent flying back with a speed like his greatest attack. His face turned to pulp from one blow from Luffy's mighty fist, and sent rocketing into the sky, clear away from the island and far past the eye could see. His greatest plan ruined, all because of a starry-eyed boy. Heh, told ... you a phony couldn't ... beat ... me. The last of his energy spent, he collapsed to the ground, a large smile on his face. White Nova Star. The star fired just as Jango turned to face the noise. Boom. The room flashed brightly for a second as white fire rushed from the tiny ball in a surprisingly powerful explosion. Jango was sent back several feet by the force before crashing onto a pile of rubble he had made earlier. GRAAGGGHH. That had done the trick. That final devastating attack had finally been enough to overwhelm the hypnotized berserker's adrenaline-fueled body and sent him into unconsciousness. Usop collapsed onto his hands, panting, sore but grinning from ear to ear. USSOP. The boy turned at the sound of his voice being called out. Seeing Nami through one of the holes Jango had made, she came over to him and grabbed him by the waist, hauling him up onto her back with a grunt. Oof, wow, you're kinda light for a guy, she commented. I just go at it with a pirate in a fight to the finish, and the first thing you can do is insult me. He moaned, the aches and pains starting to really come through after his own little adrenaline rush started wearing off. Aw, suck it up, you baby. Luffy's probably worse off by now and he won't be complaining. Usop just grumbled and let the girl carry him. Hey Nami, I had to be fighting him for a good few minutes at least. Could you only show up at the last minute? What? You'd expect a cute girl like me to fight, she said all too sweetly. That would have been helpful, he said bluntly, his eyes half open and himself half conscious. Humph, you're no fun, she said annoyed, lugging her passenger out of the damaged mansion. Luffy was in heaven, sitting on a pile of gold as tall as a mountain, the crown of the Pirate King perched squarely on his head, and surrounded as far as the eye could see by the most succulent honeys you could imagine, by which I mean hams. Scarf chomp gulp. MMIATT. He bellowed. At long last he could eat as much as he'd always wanted without having to worry about his stomach exploding. All hail Luffy. 1,000 voices echoed from nowhere. All hail the Pirate King. Luffy was choked up. He patted his chest a little to fix that. He was so happy he could cry. All hail Luffy. All hail Luffy. Hail Luffy. Hail Luffy. Hail Luffy. The boy's already opened eyes opened up again as his dream self was thrust back into the real world. He closed his eyes again and groaned, trying to go back to reality and out of this painful nightmare. Wake up, Luffy, a female voice insisted. I'm trying, he mumbled, trying to turn over but his muscles were fighting against him. Get up, the girl screeched, causing Luffy's eyes to snap open and force him to realize that this was indeed reality. Reality hurt. Every square inch of his body felt like it was on fire. from the tips of his toes to the ends of his ears. Even his teeth felt like he'd been chewing on a rock. He tried futilely to get up until a feminine hand pushed him back down. Stay still, Luffy. The doc says your muscles are barely holding together. The girl, who you all must realize is Nami, said gently again while looking down at her captain. Doc? He asked curiously, trying to keep his focus off how much he hurt and noticing for the first time that he was in a rather comfortable bed. Yeah, after I dropped us up here we managed to find you idiots and drag you back here, she explained while looking over past Luffy to the bed next to him. Luffy slowly turned his head to see what she was looking at and winced. Usop was bandaged from head to toe in gauze a foot thick. Tubes poked out of the wrappings at various areas and were hooked up to medicine and blood packs. He wasn't even touching the bed since all four limbs were being held in traction, leaving him dangling over it as he slept. That young man is something else, came an elderly voice from the room's doorway. A man who looked to be in his early 60s entered, wearing a cliché white coat and stroking his goatee. Next to you, I haven't seen anyone this badly injured since someone insulted his mother in front of his father more than a decade ago. He looked over the teenage mummy with a worrying eye. I swear you two are lucky to be alive. Anyone else would be dead after what you did for our island. You know what we did? Luffy asked somewhat sadly. Usop had been so determined that his village wouldn't even know about the pirate invasion. He didn't want to see that effort wasted. Of course, the doctor said happily. Between you and your swordsman friend stopping that fire and Usop besting that burglar on Lady Kaya's estate, you'll be heroes of this island for years to come. Fire? There wasn't any fire. It was MPH. The captain looked up at his navigator, who had clamped her hand over his mouth. Ha ha ha. The smoke must have really gotten to you. Of course it was a fire. What else could make that much black smoke? She said in a cute but deliberate way, punctuating each word and hiding it behind a ditzy guise. Luffy was all that he appeared was not that stupid and decided to go along with it. Well, you know what they say. Luffy laughed nervously. As a matter of fact, the doctor didn't know what they say, or who it was that said it, but didn't really have the time to waste in what he was sure to be a long and pointless talk, so he turned in and left the patients to their own devices. So no one knows what really happened? Asked Luffy, slowly pushing his hands down and himself up. The girl shook her head. Not a clue. The only black cat pirate they found was Jango, and there wasn't so much as a sliver of their ship left. The forest suddenly losing so many trees at once, I thought I'd have to explain, but they seem to have came up with their own idea of what happened. Probably their minds refusing to accept something so strange and trying to rationalize it, no matter how flimsy that is. Said Luffy, clearly not paying attention. She had to grab her wrist to stop herself from walloping the rising boy. Rising? Oh no you don't, she said firmly, placing her hand on his chest and pushing him down, or at least trying to. Even with his muscles holding together by strings, he was still able to overpower her. He shakily pulled himself into a seated position and dragged his legs off the bed. Bracing himself, he set his feet on the floor. A sharp pain erupted in his soles and shot up his legs. Like a lifetime of cramping was happening all at once. It spread up his body as the shock of the knotting made him jump from shock, causing his whole tired body to seize up. Can't move, he moaned before falling back onto the bed. I warned you, said Nami as Luffy bit his lip to stop himself from crying out in pain. She sighed and left the room, leaving the Logia user and the liar to enjoy their pain and peace. So when can we leave? Said a gruff if somewhat strained voice. While nowhere near as injured as the other two, Zoro had still taken a beating. His wounds were bandages but could still move around with relative ease. He had a thick wrappings around his head where Curo kicked him and some around his sides, which were slightly soaked with blood. Nami sat across from him in the doctor's waiting room, nursing her own negligible injuries. Well, if you don't mind carrying Luffy, we should be able to go before the day is gone, Zoro mumbled in response, more sore about getting injured by some cats than any real concern for his captain. That idiot was too stubborn to let something like this worry him, so why should Zoro be any different? Excuse me, came a soft female voice. To the Straw Hat's surprise, the mistress of the now destroyed mansion entered the small medical building, an assortment of human-vegetable hybrids behind her. The kids rushed in. Latching onto the girl's hands, they started pulling her towards the door to the next room where Usop was. Hold on there, the doctor said, barring the boy's way. Where do you think you're going? We need to see the captain, shouted Ninjin. Yeah, we heard he beat up that creep. No shouting in the doctor's office, you little brats, the man bellowed. Please, said Kaya quietly. Can we see Usop? Her eyes grew slightly larger and more pitiful. Needless to say, the man crumbled like a sandcastle. He sighed and moved aside. Just make sure the boys are careful around him, madam. He has enough breaks as it is. Kaya nodded and ushered the boys into the room. Nami, being curious herself, especially with what she thought she saw Kaya was wearing a second ago, decided to go back in and closing the door behind her, leaving Zoro to fall asleep sitting up. The Usop pirates clambered around their captain, each wide-eyed and clearly worried for the older boy but trying very hard not to go against the doctor's orders. Kaya moved around to see Usop's bandaged face, white wrapping masking it except for the mask that allowed him to breathe. The girl's eyes misted over slightly as she ran her hands gently over his cast. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You had to go through so much just to protect me from Klahadore and those pirates." Nami opened her mouth to deny it but was cut off by her captain. "Don't bother Nami. If she knows it's pointless to tell her anything else," he said while trying to regain movement in his fingertips. "Yes," said Kaya. "I found out about Curo's deception when I found another of my butler Mary lying in his own blood. It was very lucky that I was able to get him to the doctor while everyone was evacuating town to escape that big fire that sprung up." Kaya glanced over at Luffy and smiled. The captain smiling back. "What are you going to do now?" asked Nami. "Your mansion was destroyed in the fight." The wealthy young woman waved her off. "It's only a building of brick and wood. It can be rebuilt," she said quietly. "I can always live in the village until it's repaired." "You can stay at my house," said Payman energetically. "No mine," Ninjin growled back, forcing Tamangi to get between the boys. Kaya smiled at the boys before looking back up at the pirates. "And what will happen to the island's brave heroes?" "We're leaving at sunup," said Luffy firmly, before crashing back down to the bed. "I'd hate to agree with him, especially with these idiots the way they are, but the longer we stay on the island the worse it might get for everyone. Harboring pirates, even new ones, is a major offense for the Marines," explained Nami. Kaya wanted to argue with her, but found she couldn't. Her eyes drifted back to the long-nosed boy, her hand gently brushing over his bandaged body and thinking about what he did for her sake. She wanted to wrap her arms around him and cry her thanks while never letting go, but no, he was needed elsewhere. "If you're going tomorrow, then I have a request I would like to make of you." The process of transferring 2 critically injured people out of town was easy. Without the doctor's consent was still pretty easy, but Kaya would be getting an earful later once the medical practitioner found out her role in them leaving. The process of transferring 2 critically injured people out of town in broad daylight without anyone in town noticing anything was next to impossible, especially considering if they were seen, then Kaya, the boys and the doctor would have to explain why they let the notorious pirates escape before their reign of terror could begin. Once they make it big, that is. The 3 boys carried the slightly less critical Luffy, who was still knotted in ways that shouldn't be physically possible and still quite paralyzed, while Usop was getting a piggyback from the not as injured Zoro. Technically speaking, it wasn't so much broad daylight as it was the wee hours of the morning. The group managed to quickly and quietly make their way to where the Black Cat's ship had formerly been docked, and many an eye widened in shock at the boat that had replaced it. The caravel was far from being the biggest boat in the world, more like a private vessel for short-distance sailing rather than what the Straw Hats had in mind. It looked to be made of a light brown oak, with an even lighter wood making up the ship's mast, which supported a red and white horizontal striped sail. A large iron band surrounding it contrasting nicely with the stark white that painted the rail, keel and ship head, which was in the shape of a sheep's head. Nami and Zoro both shared a thought that was less than gracious to say the least about the boat. Luffy and the boys on the other hand. "WWOOWW," yelled Luffy excitedly. The agony of his injuries temporarily pushed to the back of his mind, and he dropped off Zoro's back and ran up to the ship, spreading his arms as wide as possible to hug it. What a cool-looking ship. It's even got a goat-type demon head as a figurehead. No one had the heart to tell the boy that it was just a sheep's head. "She isn't the most suitable ship in the world for the Grand Line," said a strained male voice. "But the Going Mary is my pride and joy. Please look after her." Mary looked surprisingly well for a man who'd lost at least 4 pints of blood the day before, if you ignored the thick bandages over his torso, and the pale skin and the tired eyes. "I did say he was well for a man who almost died, right? You're really okay giving over a ship to a bunch of pirates?" asked Zoro. Mary tilted his head to the side in confusion. "Pirates? What pirates?" Everyone but the densest of the group, who was out of earshot at the moment, realized what he was doing and kept quiet. "Good. Now this is a rather different ship than usual, so I'll need to tell the captain how to steer it." The group looked past Mary and saw the captain had started hugging the side of the ship. "That'd be me," said Zoro. "Excellent. Now then, you must understand that the Going Mary." While the sheep-faced man was busy instructing the swordsman on the finer points of his ship, a certain lady of note was bidding her final farewells to a certain boy of severe bodily harm. She gazed down at his still form, watching her savior breathe raggedly as his badly bruised lungs tried to take in air. "Usop," she whispered before sneakily pecking the less bruised side of his face. "Lady Kaya, a moment please," her head butler by default called out. "Coming," she called back and left the injured hero to the 3 little boys. "So how long you gonna pretend to be asleep, Captain?" asked Payman to the guy he was holding up. The mummy shifted ever so slightly in their grip. It's not like you're fooling us. We saw you sitting up in the bed just before we came in," added Tamangi. The long-nosed half-dead teen shifted in his bindings a little again. "I'll leave him alone. He probably doesn't want Ms. Kaya to get embarrassed about kissing him," Carrot Boy said in a teasing voice. The body went completely still, though the boys could swear that they felt a chill run down their arms as it suddenly became a lot colder. "Okay then, since you're not awake, then we won't be embarrassed to tell you this. Thanks for everything. It's cause of you that I have the brains to follow my dream and be a carpenter, and the courage to be a bar owner, and the notebook full of tall tales I plan to use to make millions off of in book sales." The other two looked at their onion-headed friend. "What? I can't be a little greedy. Anyway, it's all thanks to you, brave Captain Usop. You're the greatest." They dropped him with a thud the second they saw tears and snot run from his face to his back. "Why does everyone in the world have so much dang tears and snot?" Payman shrugged. "I dunno. Exaggeration." They picked up the crying mummy and carried him onto the boat, dropping him in the middle of the deck with a thud before scuttling back to land. The other three clambered on soon after, Nami taking the captain's wheel, the actual captain more content to sit on the demon head than actually steer the boat, and Zoro looked out over the side rail. "Take care," said Mary, who didn't want to seem rude despite knowing no one here. "Watch out for our no-good lying captain now," shouted Pimmin. "Don't come back until your stories aren't lies anymore. My books will sell more if I say they're based on a true story," dittoed Tamangi. Web. Kaya simply watched the boat as Zoro unfurled the sail and it slowly began to pull away from the cliffside. "Goodbye everyone," she called out weakly as the Straw Hat crew waved farewell to Syrup Island. "I must say, Ms. Kaya," the sheep man said while watching his pride and joy sail from view, "you're an infinity more believable liar than Usop was." The lady looked at the man, well sheepishly. "Was it really that obvious?" Mary chuckled. "Being a better liar than Usop doesn't mean you're any good at it, Ms. Kaya. And judging from the hue on the bridge of your nose, I can tell you really didn't want him to go." The hue returned full force. He smirked a little but turned away so she wouldn't see. "You know as I do that setting out to sea is the best for him. Ever since his first lie, all he's ever wanted was for them to all be true." At his mistress's response, he continued. "His father was a marksman of unparalleled skill, and could shoot the wings of a fly from 100 paces without killing it. Naturally, this got attention from a famous pirate crew who invited him to sail the Grand Line. Unfortunately, soon after this, Usop's mother fell deathly ill. The day before she passed away, Usop came running through the village like the hounds of hell were after him, screaming pirates are coming at the top of his lungs, claiming the crew that his father absconded with had returned with Yasop in tow." Kaya hung on every word. "No one is even very certain that it was a lie the first time. Usop probably just wanted it to be true so that his mother would get better and he wouldn't be left alone, and has told that lie every single day afterwards, hoping that one day his father would come back." The blonde girl wiped away the moisture collecting in her eyes. "Ms. Kaya, you met him shortly after your parents passed on, sharing his tales with you so you would not suffer like he did. But now the time has come for you to be strong on your own, and pay him back for all he has done." "MMMM," she hummed, staring out after the Going Merry, a big smile across her face. "I think I'd like to be a doctor." "That's a good goal." Aboard the Going Merry, the pirates celebrated their new crew member and ship with a round of drinks, with only two not drinking out of a straw. The next day, 3 little boys ran through the village, screaming their heads off that pirates were coming, just as they would do the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day beyond that. Once more, in a scene that is increasingly overused at the beginning of a new arc, we find the Straw Hats on the ocean, this time sailing towards the Grand Line in a marvelous new ship that by all right shouldn't be used for more than short island trips with a crew not even half as big as what other pirates usually enter with. Nami continued to steer her course while Zoro had went to the upper deck to swing his weight-covered practice blade. Usop and Luffy were being the least useful to the voyage since their duties primarily consisted of drinking and dancing despite only recently being near completely crippled. Through the miraculous power of anime physics, both the idiot captain and the cowardly sniper had managed to heal in a matter of days. For the most part at least. The burst vessels had went past the initial stages, and now Luffy resembled a giant walking bruise. Usop, though he had been wrapped head to toe in foot-thick gauze, was now the least injured, with only a thin head wrap and a few bandages were in there. Right now, though, he was actually taking care of one of the more important duties of being the ship's captain, designing the flag. I know, it doesn't exactly scream hard work when Nami is all but left to running the ship herself, but without a flag you're not a pirate. End of story. You're not allowed to be clever and hide that you're a pirate until you can make your move. If you don't have a Jolly Roger, then no matter how famous or powerful you are, all you're gonna be known as is a sea bandit. Like a mountain bandit but on a boat. What's that? A mountain bandit on the sea is a pirate. Do you have a Jolly Roger? No, then you're just a bandit. Finished, Luffy declared loudly while holding up the black painted cloth. What do you think? That you badly need lessons was what they were all thinking. Not all in the same exact words, of course, but still. They could see what he had tried to create. They really could. If they squinted and tilted their heads a little, they could just make out a grinning skull wearing what was supposed to be Luffy's hat. "Oh, Luffy," said Nami, who was trying to think of a nice way to let him down. "Your flag looks like crap," Zoro said, saving Nami the trouble. Luffy's brow furrowed in confusion. He looked down on it and eyed it with what would pass for him as critically. "Really? What's wrong with it? Do you think it should look angry instead of smiling? Or the hat's brim is too wide?" "Nah, it's fine. You're just crap at drawing," replied Zoro. "Phew, for a second I thought you just didn't like the design." Nami made a note not to bother trying to spare Luffy's feelings. "The idiot seemed to bounce back from anything you threw at him. Lucky for you. The great and powerful Usop just so happened to be a world-famous artist." "Idiot. I don't believe you. So have taken the task of designing our Jolly Roger on myself. Witness the awe-inspiring symbol of this mighty crew." He unfurled another large black cloth. Wow, they had to admit that it was a really nice flag. Now this showed real promise. From the flag it was clear that Usop had a steady hand and genuine artistic talent, as well as a serious case of narcissism. "Not your symbol, idiot," Nami belted out along with a rap to the back of the liar's head. The end result was a proper, if rather intimidating, skull and crossbones hanging from atop the crow's nest and stretched over the sail. You could practically see the extra mass in Usop's head after doing it. 3 of the 4 pirates collapsed onto the deck, 2 exhausted because of the work involved and the third generally being a lazy person. Bam! Usop and Nami jolted up at the sound of something heavy hitting the deck, then jumping a mile as they came face to face with the business end of a cannon. "Look what I found in the captain's quarters." "Gank. Luffy, next time you want us to look at the ship's cannon, don't point it at us." Luffy rubbed his head and looked at his seething shipmates. "Aw, don't be like that. This thing's not even loaded, see." Kaboom! The smell of gunpowder, deafening noise and falling onto the floor when the cannon wheeled backwards from the blast told him otherwise. The cannonball skimmed above the ocean, hitting a small spit of land and blowing it to pieces. "Oh, my head." He once again was rubbing the back of his skull gently, just as the shadows of his 2 compatriots towered above him. Nami holding her staff and Usop rolling 3 pellets between his fingers. Oops! The walking bruise looked like a crawling smear for the next while. "Seriously, give me one reason why I can't be captain." Nami had several good reasons why she would not name the newest member of the crew as captain, though taking up the mantle herself was becoming increasingly more appealing. All Luffy could do was fight. Sure, he had that whole deep insight thing going for him, but it only showed in brief flashes after long periods of idiocy, forgetfulness, and a tendency not to think things through. For example, his decisions in rounding up crew members were much to be desired. "No," the 3 chorused. "Why shouldn't we have some sort of entertainment? We need a cook." "What part of that is so hard to understand?" grumbled Zoro while seated in the corner, feeling too cool to sit at the table like a normal person. "Yeah, someone who can tell at a glance what we can and can't eat out on the ocean and how to prepare it safely. A cook is almost, if not just as important as a navigator on long voyages." Luffy tilted his head to one side and pouted. "So, it's not like none of us can fish, and we can easily buy anything we want at an island. Why can't we get a musician next?" It was like talking to a wall. The boy had never came across a food you simply couldn't take a bite out of from the stalk or grill and swallow in one bite. He wasn't wary of animals you'd normally call edible suddenly being able to secrete poison or suddenly growing razor-sharp spines because it's a subspecies in another part of the world. Something a cook, especially one working on a ship for a long voyage, must be able to tell instantly. Nor did he know how to turn the preserves you took on voyages because of their long-lasting properties into actual food. Such things were a chef's job. "Come out and face me," a deep masculine voice yelled from outside on the deck. Luffy was on his feet in an instant, rushing out the door to see a guy with a canchan taking up his left cheek, waving a thick saber about and wrecking whatever he could see. "Hey, who the hell do you think you are, tearing up my ship?" Luffy asked angrily. The man sneered, his glare visible even past his kick-ass sunglasses. "It doesn't matter who I am. There's no point in telling someone who I'm gonna kill." He charged at Luffy with his blade held over his head to cleave the boy in half. Even a sword novice like Luffy could see the attack coming from a mile away. It was all too easy for him to simply sidestep the sword as it swung down, then bring his fist up casually to deliver a tremendous gut punch to his attacker, making the swordsman cough out a small amount of blood before falling limp on Luffy's outstretched arm. "I didn't ask who you are, cause I really don't care. But I won't stand guys like you just jumping onto Mary and trying to wreck it." He tossed the attacker towards the cabin wall, making a loud thud when he hit the timber, followed by sliding down and sitting in a manner similar to the crew's own swordsman. "Johnny!" Zoro exclaimed at the sight as he stepped out of the cabin. The downed man, despite seconds before being tossed around like a rag doll, was back on his feet in an instant at the sound of the familiar voice, surprise and relief on his face. "Zoro, my brother." Zoro has a brother. The captain of the ship was quite surprised. In the same way Usop was quite a liar or Nami was quite a thief. Relax, Luffy. It's just a thing that swordsmen have with each other, Zoro explained before turning back to his old friend. He looked around a little first, then asked something that was nagging at him. Hey, where's Yasaku? Usually you guys are harder to separate than white from rice. Johnny started tearing up, which naturally meant that every hole on his face was starting to run like a freaking river. Brother, it's horrible. Johnny is ... Is what? Dying? A new man was sprawled out across the deck like he'd dropped dead there. He wore a long coat, ugly checkered shorts, and a black t-shirt that was quite clearly covered in fresh blood stains, as was the symbol-less forehead protector that he wore on his shaved bald head. This came upon him all at once, said Johnny. On minute he was fine, then bam, he collapses. His teeth start falling out like they were held in with old gum. His wounds reopened and he can barely move. He was too sick to be moved, so I shored on that little spit of land over there. That is until you decided to shoot a cannon at us. The mighty Logia user suddenly felt an inch tall until the combined gaze. Fighting a powerful urge to hide in his own darkness, he bowed as far as his spine could go. Sorry. You're completely forgiven, Johnny said straightly. Well, that was easy, Nami commented dryly. What was the point in being mad as you forgave that quickly? What's the point in getting angry? My brother's going to die anyway. He brought his arm up to his eyes and rubbed them. My brother and I have been traveling the East Blue for years, picking off the small-time bounties and ending a few reigns of terror before they even really start. Sure, we're not one of the greats, but we've managed to make a name for ourselves. He snorted and bit back his tears. But that's all over now, my brother, and all we accomplished together are gonna die right here. You idiot. The men turned to see Nami march up to Yasuke's downed form, poking and prodding him and lifting his lips to check his mouth like a horse. Nami, Zoro exclaimed, show some respect for the almost dead, added Usop. Luffy, she snapped at her captain. Go into the galley with Usop and juice about a dozen limes, then bring it back here. The two just looked at her in confusion. Go. The second time got the required response. The two raced back up the stairs and into the ship's kitchen, returning about a minute later with a tankard of lime juice which Nami instructed to make the sick man drink. Looks like you're lucky that we shot at you. Otherwise you never would have came aboard and your friend would have succumbed to scurvy, smirked the navigator, trying not to laugh at the fact that if her captain hadn't almost killed them, one of them would be dead for sure. Scurvy, that sounds familiar, Johnny said, rubbing his chin, trying to remember where he'd heard that before. Nami nodded. It should. Scurvy used to be about as common as sunburn for sailors. You get it if you don't get enough fruits and vegetables in your diet, which used to cause problems since they didn't have proper techniques to preserve them for longer voyages. Nowadays, only people going on short trips or the brain-dead travel without any fruit or veg. Ooh, would you believe we were doing the first one? No, I would not. Nuts. Luffy was impressed. Wow. So you're a doctor as well. That means I can get my musician all the sooner. Nami looked at him like he was stupid, and since that was the only way she ever looked at him, she also voiced why she was doing so. This isn't doctoring. Practically anyone who ever goes sailing has to know this. Weren't you ever taught that? I think Grandpa may have mentioned something when he sent that wolf pack after me. Or was it when he buried me alive in a fire ant nest? The crew sweat dropped while Luffy casually pondered near-death experiences. Suddenly there was a rustle beneath them. They didn't have time to react before the dying man at their feet jumped up and embraced his friend in a manly hug. I quote completely healed, cheered Yasaku, waving his arm about merrily while giving everyone a big, goofy, and completely intact smile, causing the Straw Hats to wonder if he had eaten some sort of healing devil fruit. Before collapsing back to the floor unconscious with blood pouring out of his mouth, Nami turned to her shipmates. What did we learn today? Always prepare for long voyages, said Usop. Don't think that you'll be healed immediately after being cured. Guessed Zoro. That I'm so awesome that no matter what I do wrong, something good comes out of it, said Luffy. Since Nami was certain that was as good as she would get from the Logia user, she just sighed and said good enough. Eventually the talk came back to cooking, with Luffy's stubborn refusal to admit that one was more important than anything else at the moment, and his crew deciding just to go get a cook anyway, hoping that he'd be too busy stuffing his face to care. Can't be just anyone either, said Zoro while lazing against the mast. If he's coming aboard this ship, then they can't just cook. They have to be able to at least defend themselves. Johnny, who was busy tending to the still ill Yasaku, perked up at the description. Brother, I know of such a chef. Zoro and the rest turned to him. You do? Johnny nodded. Yeah, but getting him to join might be a real pain. Luffy just grinned in response, so he'll fit right in then. Just tell us where to go. And no, when he said inside a big fish, I thought he was kidding, said Usop, staring at the apparent location of their seafaring cook. It wasn't exactly a fish. It was a fairly large ship with a big fish head for the figurehead and a large fish tail for the rudder. It had two masts which had their masts furled up, and from what the crew could see, several anchors, since the boat barely rocked against the wave. They could tell that the ship obviously wasn't built for speed since it was almost completely round and about as dynamic as a brick. I ain't kidding, Johnny huffed. This is Baratie, the Baratie, as in the famous ocean-going 5-star restaurant. I hear that this place has the best and most exotic food outside of the Grand Line. And you don't even need to book a table since not everyone can get to it, exclaimed the giddy Nami, who after so long of eating only the basics was ready for some civilized cuisine. Suddenly a deafening roar came out of nowhere, rocking the ship's Tim. Oh, the hell with it. The punchline is that it's Luffy's stomach. MMAATT. The Yami boy moaned loudly, visions of foods the likes of which he'd never tasted filling his vision. Dark wisps began to roll of his as he prepared to port himself over to the ship in a hurry. Zoro sighed and grasped the back of his captain's shirt. We better hurry inside before he freaks out everyone in the restaurant. Yeah, right, brother. I remember your face when I told you he often comes here, Yosaku snidely remarked, coughing a little as he still wasn't 100%. Zoro grinned in a manner usually reserved for men who twirl their facial hair between their fingers, sending a chill up everyone but the hungry captain's spine. Of course, that did nothing to match the absolute terror they felt when a massive thunderclap echoed through the air, and the ocean just next to Mary exploded, causing the small ship to rock harshly. Nami and Usop landed on their behinds while Zoro unintentionally let go of Luffy in surprise. Pirate scum, surrender or die, a male voice shouted out past the water spout the explosion made. The crew didn't know whether to be scared or relieved. It was a marine vessel, all right. The but ugly zebra stripe pattern it had in the word Marines in big bold letters painted across the sail left no one wondering that. However, the very fact that they had fired a warning shot instead of blowing them up first showed that the captain of it at least wasn't of the I'd send a kid to impel down for even playing pirate kind of marine like a certain hot-headed admiral. Wait, I don't recognize your Jolly Roger, the voice said again, coming from the impeccably dressed man aboard. He was a fairly tall man. Not all that surprising since short Marines don't garner much in the way of intimidation, and reasonably well built, showing he could probably hold his own in a fight if he wasn't afraid of getting his purple and black pinstripe suit ruined. His non-girly pink hair was combed back and parted either side of his rather average and forgettable face. The sort of face where if you were asked for a description you'd answer with sorta and kinda, except for the scar he had on his right cheek with stitches still fresh in it. On his fists, however, were a pair of unusual knuckle dusters. Instead of the smooth design that flowed with every bump of a finger's joint, 4 screw heads were over each of them, making the new pirates wince at the implication. Well, if you don't just look like a bunch of kids playing pretend of your daddy's boat. The man taunted. I'm Lieutenant Iron Fist Fullbody of the Marines. And who might you brats be? Are you really pirates or just pretending? Luffy temporarily forgot about his hunger, seeing this as a chance to start making a name for himself. Crossed his arms and yelled proudly, "We're the Straw Hat Pirates. We just made our Roger yesterday, but we're the real deal." Oh, Fullbody said, scanning the crew, lingering on Zoro briefly before stopping on Johnny and Yosaku. You two are those low-rank bounty hunters, Jamie and Kasaku or something, right? Jamie narrowed his eyes behind his glasses. That's Johnny and Yosaku. Oh, like it's important. Fullbody smirked. From the look of it, you two were kidnapped by these no-name rookies. That's kinda sad, because I don't think even the weakest of crews would waste their time recruiting a couple of idiots who've never claimed a bounty past a few million. Yeah, Johnny said with his hand to his ear. Brother, I think this 2-bit Marine just insulted us, he said in a mocking tone. Yosaku took a drag on his cigarette and nodded, bringing his hand up to take the cigarette and discreetly cough up some blood. Yeah, we can't let some color-blind idiot tarnish our good name. Without a second thought, they drew their swords and charged at Fullbody, jumping over Mary's side and directly at the marine boat. Get ready, you marine peacock. The fight was over in seconds, and quite surprising to the pirates considering that the Marines they had seen so far had not been all that strong. Of course, that was from comparison to themselves, but you get the idea. Without flinching, Fullbody brought his metal-knuckled right fist to block against Johnny's swords, smashing through the blade like plaster and ramming his fist right between the bounty hunter's eyes. His unguarded fist corkscrewed, both deflecting Yasuka's sword away from him and catching him in the solar plexus. The two were dropped like weights. The Marine then picked up the two and with minimal effort flung them back onto Luffy's ship face first. A Marine's rank reflects his power like a bounty reflects a pirate's. You two couldn't make it past Ensign or break a million buri like you are. Know your limits, he sneered. Fullbody. A female moan came from inside the Marine ship cabin just before a door opened and a pair of thin, hairless arms reached out to grasp his. Come on, quit picking on those kids. You know the Baratie doesn't hold tables if we're late. He looked into the cabin and smiled fine. He turned back to the Straw Hats. Today's my day off, and this ship isn't made for capturing scum like you, so I'll leave for now. But if I see you again out there, you'll be mine. With that, the ship began to sail away. Luffy, Zoro, and Usop stared after the ship while Nami knelt down beside Yosaku to check the damage. She found several papers had fell out of the amateur swordsman's jacket. They had a picture, a number, and the word wanted on them. Bounty posters. Nami whispered. Yes, Sister Nami, the bald man moaned. We carry posters of every bounty in the blue on us at any given time so we know who we can take in. We've only caught some small fries at the moment, but soon we'll have the big fish. Nami stayed deadly quiet, biting her lips while looking at a bounty that had caught her eye. Back on the ship, Fullbody, leaving the cabin he was in and covered in lipstick marks, turned to an ensign keeping an eye of the pirate ship they were leaving. Let's nip this in the bud, okay? Aye, sir, the Marine said and lit the cannon, sending the round shell at them with a loud boom. Fullbody watched almost in slow motion as the ball went rocketing at the crew. Glad he stopped something that hadn't even started. He was so gonna enjoy this ... or at least that's what he thought until black fire erupted on the ship that he was sure the cannonball didn't cause. Less than a minute ago, Usop had his share of positive traits. Granted, they were vastly overshadowed by his negative ones, but he still had them. Among these traits was his incredible eyesight, which allowed him to be a hell of a sniper. It was these eyes that were trained on Fullbody's boat that allowed him to see the seamen ready the cannon at a distance the others would barely catch. Luffy, they're gonna fire on us. He then followed his first instinct to jump so he would be carried by the explosion to safety. Of course, the cannon hadn't even been fired yet, so instead he just crashed face first beside Johnny. Boom! Just as the cannonball was fired, Luffy jumped onto the bulwark. Black fire erupting from an outstretched arm and swallowing the explosive orb whole, shocking everyone in the vicinity. The bounty hunters and Usop's jaws were hanging at their knees. Nami turned away and Zoro was more annoyed than anything that he hadn't had the chance to see if he could split it in two before it exploded. Fullbody, on the other hand, was more confused. He wasn't close enough to see that Luffy was the source of the oddly black flame and wondered as to what the heck was inside that shell. Luffy grinned as his power swirled to form a black whirlpool in his outstretched hand. Here's your cannonball back. YAMI release. He yelled just as the whirlpool bulged slightly and shot something out at the Marines at full speed ... only not a cannonball. It collided with the Marine that had shot the cannon and sent his crashing into the captain's cabin hard enough to make the wood crack. Wide-eyed and trembling, Fullbody turned to his subordinate and saw not a cannonball as he instinctively feared, but a tangle of two men, one in white and the other in a striped shirt with what looked like cat ears on his head. Isn't that one of the Black Cat pirates? He wondered aloud just before he fully comprehended what just happened and proceeded to restrain the captive. Back on Mary, Usop had lifted his jaw back up and was staring after the Marine vessel, a large bead of sweat forming behind him. Oh, Luffy, I think you just fired one of the Black Cat crew at them. So that's where they went. He palmed his fist. But then, what happened to the cannonball? Hey, where did Jensen go? Felix, isn't that a copy? BOOMM. What are you waiting for? Fire another cannonball now, screamed Fullbody at another Marine. But ... sir ... the Marine stammered, putting two and two together faster than his commanding officer. They returned fire. Whether with cannonballs or captured enemy pirates, it still qualifies as returning fire. Sir, it's just fine. The angry, confused, and scared Lieutenant Fullbody loaded up a cannonball himself and quickly ignited it, sending another ball hurtling towards the crew. Again, man, this guy doesn't quit. Another vortex of darkness opened up in Luffy's hand, pulling the explosive, and this time I'm gonna make sure I hit you. I just gotta clean everything out at once. Release. The vortex grew to several times its original size and bulged tremendously, letting out whatever Luffy had stored in his dark space with a force greater than cannon fire. Pirates, animals, and plants fired from the darkness like smoking bullets, colliding with the water hard enough for the men to feel like they jumped off a building to met concrete. Others were rocketed up so high into the sky or past the horizon that they looked to be flying. Several large trees even hit Fullbody's ship, tearing through the planks like they were centuries old, and one even going over the knuckleware by a hair's width and ramming into the ship's mast hard enough to snap it in two and making the broken part fall into the ocean. The cannonball was also released and went up in a spectacular fireball as it hit its mark. Luffy was aiming for Baratie right. You missed by a mile, you dip, and $$. Guess not. Clunk, 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 clunk. The man paced the newly air-conditioned room back and forth, pausing at every full lap he did to glare out at the beautiful sea view, then at the one who caused it before resuming his march. After about 10 minutes of putting Luffy on the spot, the man sat down on the bed in the half-destroyed master bedroom, his peg leg making one last clunk as he did so. Boy, he said in a voice like he'd rubbed his throat lining with sandpaper. You mind telling me who you're working for? Huh, was Luffy's intelligent reply, rubbing his eyes. Who are you working for? You know, who paid you to kill me so they could get my customers. And no one. He hiccuped. Look, I'm sorry for blowing of your foot. The aging chef held up his hand. Relax, it was already like that. He could see the relief in Luffy's eyes at that. But that doesn't change that you still blew up a part of my restaurant. You owe me. and Zeph always gets what he's owed. Zeph was the owner and head chef of the Baratie. If his youth he had a tall and imposing figure, but years had worn away at the tall side a little, leaving him with only the imposing part. The most prominent feature about him besides his absurdly tall chef's hat, his peg leg or the piercing "do as I say or I'll peel you like a banana" eyes was his long and heavily braided mustache, shooting out at a 135-degree angle, and as straight as a metal bar it was braided to look like a strong rope. The mustache did nothing to hide the large, toothy, mirthless grin Zeph was giving the boy right now. "But I don't have any money. I just started pirating the other day." "No money, eh? Not a problem. You can work for me until you make enough to cover the cost of having this hole fixed." "Really? Thanks." Zeph's grin became mirthful. "Great. We need a new waiter and chore boy, so you get the job. With what I give you'll have enough in about a year." "All right, a week work a year." "No way." "Wham. Listen here, you destructive brat. You're in no position to tell me the conditions of how you pay me back," Zeph growled while standing over Luffy, his peg leg digging into Luffy's chest like a blunt spear. "No way." The boy resisted the urge to snap the wooden leg like a twig. Zeph glared at the boy for a second before sighing. He lifted his leg off him and sat back down, much to Luffy's relief. "All right then. If you won't stay, then I'll offer an instant alternative." "Name it," Luffy said while rubbing his chest. He should have been less quick to take the quick route, he realized, when Zeph pulled out a rusty saw from Roger knows where and stared at the boy's legs. Skewer strike. Boom. "Meanwhile, now this is more like it," said Fullbody, sitting in the comfortable chair, sitting across from a beautiful woman, and would soon be eating the most delicious food in all the sea. It was made all the sweeter by the admiring hushed whispers he of the other patrons. This was how it should be. The waiter was at their table in just a few scant minutes, pouring their wine while balancing their food in his other hand and on his head. Fullbody picked up his glass and sniffed it, catching the eye of his date. He took a delicate sip of the wine and swirled it in his mouth gently before swallowing. "Ah, a delicate bouquet from North Mikuo. I'd know that rare taste anywhere. A wine that is dry, full-bodied and slightly acidic such as this could only be Ichirotsubogash." "Right, waiter." He lapped up the sounds of amazement at his wine-tasting skills. "That is until the waiter decided to be a jackass." "Completely wrong, sir." Fullbody almost coughed up the Ichiru something at that. "North Mikuo doesn't make red wine. And I don't know what you think full-bodied or dry meant either, but this wine certainly isn't either." The chef smiled without dropping his cigarette. "And I'm the assistant chef Sanji, not a waiter." Sanji was certainly dressed like a waiter. He was tall, thin, and dressed in a black double-breasted jacket suit, a blue striped shirt, and black tie. He had bright blonde hair combed so that it covered his left eye, probably so he doesn't completely hypnotize customers with both of his spiral-shaped eyebrows. He put down the soup he was balancing in front of the giggling woman and livid marine. The admiration had turned into mocking laughter. He'd been made a laughingstock by this idiot. He'd paid extra to have that bit set up so he could impress his date. How dare this punk do that to him? He took something from his pocket and discreetly dropped it in his food, a gag toy he'd confiscated from one of his men when he thought to play a trick on his commanding officer. "Hey, what's the big idea?" he crowed just as Sanji had turned to leave. "There a problem, sir?" The lieutenant snorted. "You're damn right there is. You mind telling me what a fly is doing in my soup?" Sanji looked on at the offending bowl, seeing a small mayfly floating in the creamy broth. Looks like the backstroke to me." The tittering and whispers turned into full-blown guffaws as the marine was completely made to look the fool. "Now if you'll excuse me, Crash. The offending bowl, along with the hardwood table it was sitting on, were broken into pieces when a metal-covered fist came crashing down on it, sending crystal and cutlery everywhere. People stopped their dining and mocking suddenly while chefs ran into the restaurant from the kitchen to see what the commotion was about. "Who the hell do you think you're dealing with?" Fullbody snarled, standing up and glaring at the assistant chef. "Waiter, I'm Iron Fist Fullbody of the Marines. Not some run-of-the-mill nobody you think you can mess with." The charming humor drained from Sanji's face. He knelt down at the broken table and looked at the two broken and empty bowls, their former contents spilled and inedible. "If you'd just taken out that rubber fly you put in, you could have eaten the soup," Sanji said flatly, making the whispering at the drama go up that much more. "I'm a customer, you crap waiter." Fullbody retorted. "That mean I paid you to treat me like royalty, not a court jester." The chefs watching all paled considerably. Sanji don't. Sanji stood up to his full height, about an inch or so taller than the marine, and glared him down with his single visible eye. "That right? And I suppose you think money gives you the right to act like a messer, right?" The screws on Fullbody's knuckles began to move, rapidly picking up in speed until a drill-like sound filled the air. The fist blurred at the chef's with the intent of punching through the back. What followed for the next handful of seconds was a better, more vicious and merciless than anyone in the Baratie could say they had ever seen. No one could tear their eyes away from the scene, even though some had went deathly white and others suddenly found themselves holding their food down. The end result was a pink-haired and purple-suited man now sporting a red face being held by his jaw up in the air by an angry waiter chef who looked like he was ready for rounds 2 to 300. The first and only rule of Baratie, he said with no small edge. Don't waste food. If Fullbody could eat gulp out of fear, this really wasn't his day. He continued to think that when he found himself flying through the air to land on the floor, whacking the back of his head onto the back of a table. Sanji, what the hell do you think you're doing? A stereotypical sailor voice shouted. Patty cooker was ... the patty cooker of the boat, in charge of grilling, braising, frying and baking burger patties as well as steaks and chops. He was the sort of man who you'd expect to eat large quantities of that variety of food as well. A large muscular build in an ill-fitting cook's cloths with bulging forearms disproportionate to the rest of his arms like a certain other nautically known cartoon. His head was shaved right into the wood and a stylish beard surrounding his heavy-lipped mouth. Patty the sailor man grabbed Sanji by the wrist, being careful not to touch the hands, and glared at him. You idiot. The number one rule of this establishment is that the customer is king. They're the lifeblood of the business. So why, pray tell, is his lifeblood leaking out of him? Sanji pulled his arm out of the cook's grip and shrugged. He wasted food. The larger cook gripped the side of his head. AGH, what the blast is it with you and food? You're gonna get us closed one day, you idiot. Huff, yeah, like today. Fullbody moaned and got up. I'm gonna make sure that this madhouse is shut down. And this lousy waiter is put away for a long time. Not if I send you away first, the cook said calmly, earning a horrified look from Fullbody and a gasp from everyone else. The other chefs rushed the blonde, grabbing at him every which way to stop their comrade from making a bigger mistake than he'd already made. Boom! All eyes were drawn from the commotion as a new ruckus overtook their hearing. The ceiling caved in and whatever was in the room above came crashing through. From the horribly pain sounds and sailor class cussing, the Baratie staff could guess who it was even before the dust settled. Get off! A young voice growled before a man in an absurdly tall hat came flying out of the mess to land on his foot and peg several feet away. A straw-hatted boy pulled himself out of the mess and stood up, clutching his chest in clear pain. A small but very noticeable bruise about the size of a coin in the dead center of his chest. Zeph snorted and brushed himself off. What's the matter, boy? I've hit my eggplant head protege with harder kicks than that. Luffy just glared. He didn't get mad at much, but getting jabbed dead center of the chest by what is basically a blunt spear could make anyone a little upset. Chef Zeph, a little help, said one of the cooks, restraining Sanji. Zeph's reaction was immediate and no less hostile as his last. His peg lashed out at the teen, catching him where the neck meets the shoulder and sending him to the floor. Are you trying to make us go under, you eggplant? Well, at least you know how to discipline the help. Not that that's going to make me reconsider shutting you down, chuckled Fullbody while pulling himself up, only to be sent back to the floor by the irate Zeph. Are you insane? Do you know who I am? Groaned the Marine, trying once more to pick himself up. The head chef snorted. Yeah, you're the lousy asshole that thinks he can shut me down. Feel free to try. I'll leave a place as the dishwasher boy open for you when you get laughed out of the Marines. Fullbody stared at the elder man with wide eyes. This was the place that had everyone singing praises. Were these guys even really cooks? Just as he was thinking about implausibility of the situation, the entrance flung open and a Marine ensign ran in. Lieutenant Fullbody. He's escaped. The ensign declared that Krieg pirate we caught a few days ago busted out of the holding cell and beat the whole crew half to deek. The Marine's chest exploded in a shower of blood when a bullet passed through, causing the man to fall to his knees and to the floor, gasping for life. You mean almost the whole crew half to death? You unwilling to take care of the other half? The holder of the gun stated calmly while walking into the restaurant. The patrons and Marine present pedaled backwards at the sight of him. Even though he was covered in blood and filth, visibly emaciated and panting for every breath, the man still gave of an aura of intimidation, one that said he could kill anyone here. He plopped down at a recently seated and even more recently vacated table and plopped his legs up on it, waving his weapon at the gaggle of chefs. Hey, a little service over here. Luffy grinned from ear to ear. This guy was just like Zoro when they first met. Zeph was already adding the damages this guy would make to his repairs. Patty, on the other hand, what'll ye be having, squid face? The burly armed man said while looming over the pirate while giving a grin that made him look like he ate small children. The other restaurant goers backed up considerably at that statement. The half-dead pirate just grinned, showing his teeth hadn't been bruised in what looks like weeks. I could care less what it is. Just make sure I get a lot of it in here in the next 30 seconds. Patty's smile only widened. A lot of it, eh? Well, I'm sure we could arrange something for such a distinguished scumbag such as yourself. All we ask is that you can pay the bill, sucker. The starving man grinned, of course. He pressed the gun right against the large man's forehead. You take lead. Patty's expression changed slowly, the grin slipping from his face like it had been stuck there with old gum and becoming calm and stoic, looking up at the barrel with indifference. It is my understanding that Sir has no intention of paying. Congrats. You're not a total idiot. The gun's hammer clicked. Now feed me. Patty looked at him for a second before answering. All right, Wadoom, faster than very few could follow. Patty had brought his fist down on the pirate's head, crushing the chair he was sitting on with him. Will you take a knuckle sandwich? Can't believe I said that. The cooks, customers, and present Marines just entering the room alike were cheering on as Patty lay the smack down on the already near-dead man, except for Fullbody, who was taking this opportunity to leave this madhouse as soon as possible. The BORATIE is for paying customers ONLY. He punctuated each word with a firm kick to the Krieg crewman's midsection. When he was sure that the non-paying lout was thoroughly beaten, he picked him up by the back of his pants and tossed him out the door and onto deck. Go starve somewhere else, he said before slamming the door behind him to the cheering of everyone in the restaurant. Dear paying customers, he said politely while curtsying the Baratie would like to apologies for the unplanned floor show. Please return to your meals. He was met with more cheering from the grateful guests, much to his ego's pleasure. The only ones not impressed were Luffy, Zeph, who grumbled at the loss of another chair, and Sanji, who simply turned about to head into the kitchen. Luffy watched as he did so and wondered where exactly he was going. Jin the wolf lay on the deck struggling to get up. His injuries piled on top of his severe starvation, making it all but impossible for him to move, let alone stand. What's the point? He thought while still trying to get up. I'm hungry, tired, and I'm pretty sure that guy broke something. Why bother? His struggling attempts to get up slowly became weaker and weaker until he finally stopped moving at all. Labored breath, the only sign he was alive. That's when it happened. It washed over him and filled his every sense. Faint sizzling like angel voices, a smell like the shampoo of a lover as you embrace her, and a sight that would make any pirate spit on one piece. 8. A voice like God himself echoed from nowhere. He needed no more encouragement. He dived at the plate, automatically grabbing a spoon he somehow knew was there, and started shoveling the risotto into his maw at a pace your mother would clap you one for. So good. He groaned, better than a bilge rat like me deserves. How he managed to get that out without taking seconds to breathe between bites is something Sanji would never know. You like it? It's squid risotto. Not the most popular thing on the menu, but we always have some made just in case. Thank you, Jin cried. You have no idea what this means. A deck above the two, the watching pirate captain grinned. I do. He laughed loudly, drawing the attention of the two men below. It means I found my cook. Your cook, Sanji repeated. Luffy nodded and jumped down to meet them. Yeah. I need a cook on my pirate crew, and after seeing this I decided that you're it, he said, pointing at Sanji. A pirate Wait, so you're the guy that shot at the ship? Sanji snapped. Luffy at least had the decency to look embarrassed. Didn't mean to. I was just firing back after that Marine shoot at me and I couldn't control the direction of my shot. Sanji lit a cigarette and popped it in his mouth. You have to practice with all weapons, even cannons. Yeah, cannons. Well, listen good. Just don't think that cause you're a pirate that you can act like you own the place. Zeph used to be a heck of a pirate himself before he lost his foot. I can believe it, muttered the boy, rubbing the bruise on his chest still. Not surprising. Most think that first time they met him, although they think he couldn't have been much since he opened this place. But trust me, the guys who work here are worse than any pirate crew. Have to be if they want to survive. Guys like you too, the cook said, looking at both men. Unfortunately, we go through waiters and cleaners like a Marine does through ass polish. The last guys only latest about a week before they jumped ship with a passenger ship. Zeph got tired of looking and told me I was in charge of customers now, he said, rubbing his own chest a little, showing Zeph didn't have many variations in his persuasion methods. So that's why he wants me to stay, Luffy said while moving closer towards Sanji. Well, if you don't want to be a waiter here, then how's about you become a cook on my ship and we get out of here? Sanji took and dragged and shook his head. Can't. Got a good reason to stay. No. Jin and Sanji were knocked back a little by the sheer force behind the shout. Rubbing his non-covered ear, Sanji narrowed his eye at the pirate. What do you mean no? You can't ignore my decision. Can too, Luffy replied childishly. I've decided you're joining my crew and nothing's going to change that. Even if I have to drag onto my ship kicking and screaming and tie you to a pole in the kitchen. What? You can't be serious. The look in the new chore boy's eyes told his otherwise, so he tried a different and more diplomatic approach. You can't drag me onto your ship if your arms are broken, crap pirate. The blonde growled, standing and putting his hands in his pockets. The joke's on you. If you break my arms, then I can't do any chores. Luffy grinned, rubbing his shoulder, preparing for a brawl. Ooh, Jin butted in. What? The two soon-to-be combatants yelled at the one who would dare interrupt. Well, name's Jin, by the way. I was just wondering something. What exactly are you after? Rookies in this part of the world don't really do much till they are a few years older than you. Luffy lowered his clenched fists and smiled. Well, that's a dumb question. I'm after what every other pirate in the world wants. Jin's eyes widened. You don't mean? Luffy nodded. Yup, One Piece, but that's thought to be hidden in the Grand Line. You don't seriously want to go there? Go there? I'm not just gonna go there. I'm gonna conquer it and be Pirate King. Jin could do nothing but gap at the boy with the audacity to say something like that. Of course, Luffy said somewhat shyly, I don't really have a big crew yet. I'm just trying to get a skeleton crew ready, then I'll find more when I'm there. He pointed at Sanji. With Sanji here, I'll have 5 people and all including me. Hey, don't include me, chore boy. Don't go. Luffy and his unwilling cook turned to face Jin before another argument started up. A skeleton crew. Seriously? Kid, you're just starting out and seem nice enough, so I'll give you a word of warning. If you go to the Grand Line, you'll die. Stay here and give up one piece. Luffy, if he'd been told that any other way, would have laughed in Jin's face. But the way he spoke just now, as if whatever life Sanji's food had given him was drained away and leaving his tone hollow and tired. The Grand Line really scares you, doesn't it? Jin shook his head and put his hands on his temples. More than anything else, we thought it would be a walk down the beach. But that devil sea, it was something the likes no one could ever be prepared for. Sanji resisted the urge to roll his eye. Wow, for a Krieg pirate you're such a wimp. Luffy spoke up, something bothering him. What's a Krieg? Both pirate and cook looked at Luffy like he was stupid. What? No pirates ever came near where I lived, and only the mayor got the paper delivered. Luffy, said Sanji, the Krieg Pirates is the biggest and most feared pirate crew in the East Blue, all run by a guy named Don Krieg. The crew is 50 ships and 5,000 pirates big. The boy whistled. That's a lot of pirates. Must have all been wimps. Jin lifted his head back out of his hands. Wimps, he said with some annoyance at having that word thrown at him repeatedly. When you have that many guys and run out of the Grand Line when most pirates only have 1 or even 2 ships, it tells me that you were trying to make up for weakness with numbers. Jin could feel the nails Luffy was hitting going right through him. Sanji hummed in contemplation. Still, that many pirates should still be a force to be reckoned with. Luffy shook his head. If you were dealing with low-ranked marines and pirates in any other blue, maybe. But the Grand Line has a ton of other dangers where numbers mean nothing. It wouldn't matter if you had 100 men or 1,000,000. If you go in expecting the line to be like any other ocean, then you may as well sail into a typhoon and save yourself time. Sanji was impressed. For a newbie, you sound like you've been there before. Nah, I just know a guy. The chore boy grinned. Jin had kept quiet while the two boys exchanged pleasantries, all the while going over everything the boy had said. And for the life of him, he couldn't argue with any of it. The Don was quite basic in his recruitment methods. Go to the biggest, dingiest, most rat-infested scum holes they could find and start recruiting till the ships were full, never asking for background, skill level, or even name before passing out the dime a dozen flintlocks and cutlasses. For all Jin knew, the entire 5,000-strong crew were made up of 5,000 drunkards who thought it would be a laugh to be pirates. He'd have to talk to the Don about this. His stomach no longer as twisted in knots, he felt like it was time for him to get back to said man. He stood up, wincing as the pain from his recent pummeling, and started to make his way over to one of the ship's lifeboats. You heading back to your crew? Asked Luffy. Jin didn't bother responding and just unfurled the sails. Chef, yeah? He turned to face the blonde and smirked. Thanks for the food. I'd hate to be you when those nut jobs inside find out what you did. Sanji threw the plate and cutlery over the side in response. Did what? Jin just shook his head and kicked the Baratie's side, sending the ship forward before the wind caught the sails. He turned back and bowed deeply to his savior, his head right against the deck of the boat, not uttering a single word. Sanji turned away in embarrassment. Luffy unsurprisingly grinned his almost perpetual grin. After a few minutes without it dropping, Sanji was curious enough to ask why he was smiling like that. Just wondering how you're gonna explain one of the ship's lifeboats being stolen by a pirate. Sanji stared at his for a second. FK, yes Sanji. Zeph's voice rang out from the upper deck. How are you gonna explain that? Double FK. Maybe he could stay for a year. Being a chore boy didn't seem to be anything all that difficult. He just came in, introduced himself to the kitchen staff, and sat down on a conveniently placed chair, never once bothering to ask if there was anything he could do while the men and women ran about like chickens with their heads cut off. That is until one chef nearly ran into the seated boy while holding a recently decapitated bird. You lazy ass, the unshaven and sunglasses-wearing man growled. If you don't know what to do, then go wash the dishes. He pointed over to a loaded sink. If you say so, said the boy calmly, and proceeded to wash the fine china. With that settled, the chefs went back to their duties, one of which was apparently bad-mouthing Sanji while Luffy listened in. I don't know why Zeph doesn't just kick that idiot off the ship, Patty complained while flipping a recently filleted fish in a pan. Cause he was the first guy here aside from Zeph man, responded the cook next to him. So what? He's the one that made all the waiters jump boat, starts more fights than any customer, and treats all of us like bad tuna. A murmur of agreement went round the room. I tell you, if I had me way. Anyone else hear that? The clear and distinct sound of things breaking echoed around the kitchen. The cook's head swiveled around looking for the source, before falling on Luffy at the sink. The boy was staring back at them with large unblinking eyes. All the while his hands fumbled about under the water where loud cracks emerged from every few seconds. How many dishes have you broken? Patty said in shock. Luffy shrugged. Dunno. Probably not a good idea for me to do something this delicate being as strong as I am and all. Patty raised a fist over Luffy's head only for Karn to grab it. Easy, Patty. Remember you broke your share when you first started. Calming down some, Patty slowly face-palmed and pointed over to the appliances. Just clean the metalware. Luffy did as complied, but not before snatching some food from a tray and devouring it in a single bite. That took 8 hours to cook, screamed a cook in dismay. Luffy smacked his lips a little before moving towards the metal utensils. Need salt. The cook cried at the loss of something he had taken all day to prepare. Luffy took hold of a wet cloth and stood over a very large wok. Okay, I don't think I can break this, he said before going to scrub it. Wait, that's YEOWZZIINNGG. Thud. The guests at the table near their kitchen were jolted from their seats when the timber and plaster suddenly erupted from the wall and part of a large metal disc appeared where it had been, cutting the strings that had held a large heavy painting of a very beautiful woman in a southern dress on top of a stiff-lipped 63-year-old who had nothing better to do than belittle her great-niece's choice in men. The entire staff stared at the wok firmly embedded in the wall with eyes as wide as dinner plates. Patty had sunk to the floor below the wok, which had been centimeters from doing to him what he'd done to that monkey a few months ago to make soup. BGH. Jing yabble ... BUKABURG ... VTVT. Gibberish spouted from his mouth in shock and rage like a 2-year-old on a sugar high. Slowly and robotically rising from the floor and walking towards Luffy, who was busy running his burnt fingers under a cold tap. The chefs watched as Luffy turned around smiling at Patty, who was gritting his teeth hard enough to crack and bringing his shaking hands up towards the pirate's throat. Sorry about that, Luffy said. Patty stood there for a few seconds, his hands still level with Luffy's neck, the cooks watching with bated breath. A few more moments and one of Patty's trembling hands reached into his front pocket and pulled out a small notepad and pencil. He stuffed them in his would-be murderer's hands, then pointed at the door leading to the restaurant. He looked back up at Patty for help. Go ... take ... orders, he growled out. Come again. Go ... out ... there ... and ... take ... orders ... before ... I ... kill ... you. Okay, she said cheerfully and left for the main floor. The other cooks remained still with Patty still staring at where Luffy had been. Karn slowly made his way over to his friend. Ooh, Patty. Bam. The pan Karn quickly picked up was caved in by spinach-powered giant forearms. Patty suddenly remembered he had to breath and took several deep gulps of air. Better? Karn asked. Patty took in a few more breaths and nodded, heading back to his station and resuming his work, only to stop a few seconds later. What are you looking at? Get back to work. The kitchen was suddenly abuzz from activity as the cooks resumed what they did best. The straw-hatted boy, not as oblivious to the anger, grumbled at how his first day of work had been going while scanning the room for people ready to order. If I wanted to be threatened to be strangled, I'd have stayed home. As he was mulling over his treatment, he spotted yet another great injustice. His crew, picking at plates that were minutes before filled with mouth-watering food and rubbing their satisfied stomachs while sighing contentedly. This was another of the few ways to get Monkey D. Luffy truly angry. If you could eat and he couldn't. What the hell? He snarled through his teeth. I'm slaving away and you guys are sitting about eating. How unfair is this? Zoro took the toothpick he was using out of his mouth and smirked at his captain's anger. Hey, we're not the ones who tried to blow up this place. That was an accident. Nami replied. And your point is what? GGGRRRR. Hey, leave the poor guy alone. He has to work here for a whole year and he doesn't need us rubbing it in, said Usop. That lightened Luffy's mood considerably, until his sniper opened his mouth again. On a completely unrelated note, can I change our pirate flag? You know, just until you're out of debt. Sanji meanwhile was pouring wine for a girl he was quickly turning into putty when a loud shout re-solidified his efforts, much to his chagrin. Damn it. Excuse me, madam, I'll go take care of that noise, he said politely, making the woman blush slightly and him to dance a pervy jig in his head. He walked over to the table. He liked the kid well enough, but if he stopped him getting any, then he must be destroyed. He slinked up behind the younger boy and lifted his leg high over his head and froze. Her hair moved like fiery red silk as she turned to face him. Her eyes deeper than the deepest seas, skin like the finest china, and lips that begged him closer. She was a goddess. His legs, powerful enough to crush rock, turned to jelly and bring him to his knees. His jaw went slack at the sight of her, and he could not tear his eye away from the world she now filled. With titanic effort, he put his hands on the floor and tried to push himself up. His palms numb and his legs feeble, he slowly rose, his power returning like the tide, surging through him to reach higher and higher until, thank Neptune, I owe him so much to allow me to meet you on this glorious day. The Straw Hats looked at him oddly until he shoved Luffy out of the way so he could get down on one knee in front of Nami, clasping her dainty hand in his uncalloused ones and gazing up at her in doe-eyed affection. Oh merciful goddess, why must you be so cruel, to bring me a vision such as you, yet only allow us together if I were to become a dastard? Tears formed in his eye at the impossible choice. So become a pirate, you eggplant, Zeph said, appearing from the stairs leading to the upper quarters. What was that crap, chef? Snapped Sanji, suddenly on his feet and glaring at his mentor. What your hair cover you ears to? I said beat it. Nobody wants you here anymore, Zeph said gruffly. At the same time as this was going on, Jin the not-so-hungry wolf had managed to reach his destination in a far shorter time than first thought, arriving at a pretty uninteresting island. Sailing into an inlet where a not-so-uninteresting ship was anchored, he made his way up to the deck, walking over the bodies of groaning and pleading men to reach the captain's cabin. The door creaked open and promptly fell of its hinges after a few inches of movement, turning to splinters upon hitting the floor. Jin, a deep and coarse voice said weakly, followed by a bout of violent coughing. Why, yes, Don Krieg, it's me, he said and walked inside. You look well. That means cough you found food. He nodded, and then did something that he was hereafter regret. Y'all take me to hack where you got it. It wasn't a request. He stood still for a few moments, then nodded. What the hell are you talking about, old man? Sanji asked, his brow twisting into an even greater spiral of irritation. You heard me, Sanji. Leave, get lost, beat it, go be a pirate or marine or whatever. Just as long as you leave and never come back, the old chef replied. Don't talk crap. I'm the sous chef of this place. The only one that's been here longer than me is you. And that's a matter of seconds. So why would I leave? Zeph stroked his beard in mock concentration. Oh, I don't know. How about you pick a fight with anyone that doesn't lick their plate clean? You turn into a chain-smoking puddle of goo whenever you see a pretty girl and see you're a lousy cook. Sanji bit through his cigarette at the mention of sea. Besides, you're despised by every other person who lives on this boat. So do us all a big favor and leave. Never, Sanji shouted once more, drawing the whole restaurant's attention. No matter how many times you tell me to or how many of those asses hate me, I'll never leave the Baratie. Coup de mud. Zeph must build his furniture out of scrap wood or something. How else could he afford to replace the tables he'd lost today, including the one he just broke by suplexing his apprentice through it? Little brat, Zeph snorted and headed back to work. Ugh, you can throw me around till you're blue in the face, crap chef, because I plan to become the next head chef when you die. The old man didn't even turn around. Then you better pray your part, giant, cause I won't be dying for another 100 years. Sanji stared after his mentor as he headed back to the kitchen, trying to turn the old man into cinders with his mind when a hand patted his back hard enough to make him cough up his stomach content. You hear that? He said you can come with us now. Luffy was quite delighted by this development. Sanji wisely ignored Luffy and rounded back on Nami, his eyebrow twisted into a heart shape with her dazzling smile. My apologies for the ruckus, madam. Please accept this complimentary fruit cocktail and wine along with my humblest apologies, he said sweetly while pulling a large glass filled with fruit and jelly out from behind his back like in an old cartoon along with a bottle of old wine. Nami was naturally delighted. The most recent member to the crew, however, was less so. Hey, what about us? That little bust-up was just as annoying for us as her, so where's our complimentary stuff? A dirty cup full of what he hoped was tea banged down in front of him, making more than half of its contents spill onto the saucer. There's some tea on the house. That better, you whiny little asshole, said Sanji, who hated having to tear his sight away from the ginger-haired goddess to deal with Needle Nose. No, as a matter of fact it isn't. Usop stood up. The food might be great, but the service stinks like Luffy before bath night. The chore boy shivered. I mean, look, you haven't even cleared our plates away after we finished like 10 minutes ago. Sanji looked over the offending dishes. Usop still had some mushrooms left. Zoro had a few stray noodles and Nami had an emptied bean pod left. You still have food on these plates. Usop gaped. Are you serious? That old guy wasn't kidding when he said you make everyone lick their plates clean. Wasting food is a crime. Eat it, the cook said in all seriousness. I hate mushrooms. The last time I ate some it turned out to be poison and I ended up in bed for a week with my face swollen up like a watermelon. I don't care if it made your nuts drop. They aren't poison, so eat the damn mushrooms. He pressed closer until he was face to nose with Usop. Will you two stop fighting? I can't enjoy this with all this yelling. Nami butted in with a mouthful of fruit. Of course, madam. All of Sanji's aggression vanished in an instant. Usop and Zoro rolled their eyes while Luffy picked at whatever his crew had left. Nami smiled suggestively and wrapped her arms around the chef's neck and pulled him into a hug. You could see the steam waft out of the cook's ears. The face he made was like Adaramoriboshi. Hapasai and Jiraiya were thrown in a blender, cooked, poured into a mold and shaped into a mask to place on the blonde's face. By the way, she purred, this food is a little pricey for me. I was just wondering. It's all on the house, he blurted out. Your male friends can pick up the extra cost. Even Zoro cracked the glass he was holding. Nami seemed to think it a good deal though and agreed. Wow, even I think that's too much, said Luffy while drinking Usop's tea. And this stuff tastes dishwater. Whack. And who told you that you could sit with the customer's chore boy? The person attached to the foot in the back of Luffy's skull said, grabbing him by the back of the shirt and dragging him back to the kitchen. Hey, no fair, my break just started. He whined all the way until the thick doors blocked all sounds he made, letting diners finally enjoy a moment's peace. A moment's peace. That moment lasted 2 days. 2 days on whining and dining for the crew. Luffy did manage to get better at his supposed duties after realizing that he couldn't get fired simply for being bad at his job. The same as anywhere else at the moment, really. He stopped cracking, and Patty only semi-feared for his life after the first day. While Nami enjoyed the blonde's charity, Usop and Zoro had taken to staying on the ship and eating what food they had to save money. Luffy was watched closely to make sure he didn't run away, but they didn't have to worry since he seemed dead set on getting Sanji to be his cook and refused to leave until it was so. For the customers, it was certainly a fresh change of pace. Regulars were both relieved and disappointed that there was no floor show to go with their meals, but knew that such times couldn't last for long on the Baratie. And those times ended when one man, while sipping on a South Blue blend, dropped his glass when he looked out the window and saw a raised Jolly Roger. Krieg. The Krieg pirates are here. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Even diners who were used to the constant fighting of pirates and cooks were running around in terror at the thought of facing the King of the East. Karn looked both horrified and a touch cocky while his bald-by-choice friend was gripping his peach fuzz head of hair. See, Patty, weren't you told not to mess with a Krieg pirate? Now they're coming to avenge his treatment here, and it's all your fault. How was I supposed to know that a crew of 5,000 would care about one guy? We're all gonna die. Waiter, I want a last meal. Shove off. I ain't spending my last hour serving nobody. While the supposedly fearless fighting cooks ran around the ship, others were not nearly so terrified. Zeph, Zoro, Luffy, and Sanji were more curious than anything else, namely as to how the massive boat could still be afloat. The flagship of the Great Krieg Pirate Armada had definitely seen better days. Not a sail on either of its 2 remaining masts were left undamaged. The figurehead looked as if someone had ripped a hunk of it off like a child ripping a hunk of fudge from a big block. The bow looked ready to break away from the stern, and the air was so filled with moans and creaks from both the ship and its occupants that it was hard to tell who was doing which. This ship was on its last legs. I don't think that was anything done by any pirate, said Sanji. That sort of damage is the kind you get caught in the mother of all storms. Luffy nodded, cracking his fists on reflex. The panic inside slowly quieted down when everyone started to hear the same thing. A noise that, although quiet, still roared over every scream of terror and crash of furniture. Thump, thump, thump. It drew closer and closer to the front doors. Guests backed away while cooks reached into their cloths. Thump, thump, thump. Crek. The front door opened slowly and with a pronounced whine from the door, revealing one tall figure in the doorway. It walked in slowly, panting with every step until in clear view of everyone. A woman screamed. Or Usop, hard to tell really. Don Krieg was a tall man, easily a head or more than Sanji or Jin, who was holding him up, and more than 3 times as wide. He was the sort of man you could tell was physically strong the way his muscles still showed, even if he looked no better than his crew member when he first came, and was wearing a heavy fur coat over a tacky leopard print shirt. Sweat and blood ran down his bandaged head, with a lot of it sticking in his Victorian-style sideburns and the rest dripping onto the thick golden chain tying his coat together. Please ... food. He moaned out while Jin inched him further into the restaurant. I've got money. Lots of money. He then collapsed. Jin, who was unable to hold him captain's weight with his own atrophied body, buckled and let the man collapse to the floor. Looks of fear melted in the wake of such a well-known pirate tumbling like that, widening and widening when Jin dropped to his knees and begged his captain to get up. Please, help him, Jin pleaded to the crowd. He hasn't eaten in over a week. He'll die if he doesn't get some food. A loud and boisterous laugh rang through Baratie, coming from Patty. Like any good laugh, it spread like a virus. The laughing grew louder and louder until almost everyone in the restaurant was holding their sides and gasping for air. This is it. This is the great Don Krieg, the most feared man in all the East Blue. Oh mercy me, I'm shakin' in me boots. Hey, we're customers, so give us food, said Jin angrily while holding an arm defensively over his captain. Shut it, snarled the strong-armed cook. He kicked the pirate off his commander. Like I'm stupid enough to give Krieg anything. I say we leave him to the Marines. Yeah, if we feed him, hell just rob us blind and take our ship. He won't even get a sip of water from us. Patty closed his eyes and lapped up the attention and praise. It was so hard to come by in a place where you were the closest thing to a thanks he got was someone not backing away from him in disgust. An insistent tugging at his pants leg led him to peer down, and almost wet himself at the sight. Craig had managed, even in his near-dead state, to raise himself up off the floor, but only enough to pull himself into a bow with his head still firmly pressed to the floor. Please, I have countless millions on my ship. I'll give you every last berry for anything to eat. Even if it's just a breadcrumb, I'll surrender everything to you. Please. Jin wiped away his tears, more disillusioned than humiliated to see his leader reduced to begging for food like an old tramp. Patty just kicked the man off him. I don't care if you were offering a whole island. You're getting nothing. Hey Patty, could you move? Sanji asked politely. Huh, oh sure. The fry cook moved out of the way on reflex in the face of manners, allowing his hated frenemy past him. Sanji moved around Patty and put a steaming plate of rice in front of the pirate and a bottle of wine. Krieg jumped on it and began inhaling. Sanji, what the hell do you think you're doing? Screamed one of the chefs. The rest, as well as the customers, freezing in horror at the sight of Krieg scarfing down as much as he could in as little time as possible. One particularly spineless man even ran for the doors and jumped overboard. What does it look like I'm doing? My job, replied the blonde like it was obvious, which it really was. Karn snorted, it's not, he'll leave like he promised, you idiot. That man got so strong cause he wrote the book on how to be a lying bastard. He, I know. Killed his old marine unit and stole the ship to become a pirate. He lied and cheated all of the East Blue until he was the man he is today. He looked down at the man eating like a dog, and he'll probably try to rob and kill everyone here when he's done choking. He was pragmatic to say the least. That's why when Krieg clotheslined him immediately after he finished speaking, there was no surprise in his expression. Pain definitely, and shock at nearly swallowing his cigarette in reflex, but no surprise. Unlike everyone else who actually were surprised what had happened. It would be several days later when Jin would realize this and a cold chill would run up his spine. However, today he was still quite weak and slow thinking from hunger, so wasn't as aware of irony as he should be. So, Captain, what are you doing? This is the man who saved you. Saved me. How come? Grugh. Krieg's ham-sized hand clamped over Jin's throat in an extremely impatient way of telling him to be quiet. Jin, Luffy yelled out. Gratitude isn't something I'm widely known for, Jin, the revived pirate said before tossing Jin to land next to Sanji several feet away. His eyes scanned the room critically, like one would a new home or car, taking in the people aboard, guests and staff alike, as well as the decor. I have to say you've got a nice boat here. Or should that be I've got a nice boat here, he said casually, letting the mere words do all the work. They did the job indeed. Guests ran screaming for the boats they rode in on, hoping to get away with their lives. Bang, a bullet sailed through the hand of the first man to touch a door courtesy of a pistol in Krieg's hands. When I claim something, I don't just claim it, I claim everything and everyone in it, he sneered. With a flick of his wrist, a pistol appeared in his other hand as well, pointing towards the other half of the room, his eyes darting around for even the smallest hint of defiance. Normally I wouldn't even consider such a tiny boat worthy to be my ship. But if any of you looked out the window, you'll see that my old ship isn't exactly up to standards. Neither is my crew, for that matter. Several people gulped loudly. Surely this madman wasn't considering what they thought he was. But I can't really be fussy right now, he sneered, so here's what's going to happen. I take the ship, the valuables, and any man strong enough to swing a sword becomes part of my crew for the rest of their lives, he said coolly. One man forgot his fear long enough to be appalled by that statement. You're insane. I'm not. Insolence. Bang. He went sailing back several feet, blood seeping into his white shirt. Maybe I didn't make myself clear. I never asked. Everything I say is a demand. You'll do what I say, when I say, because I say. Understand? Jin took a step back from his captain. He'd seen firsthand what Krieg did to those who didn't obey. Now, as my new crew, I'm assigning you the task of getting food to all my other men on my former flagship. I have 100 mouths to feed, and I don't intend for them to wait a second longer. No. The crowd parted around Karn like a yellow-bellied Red Sea. Krieg's eyes bulged in anger, and he aimed one of his pistols at the cook. You dare defy me, cook? Karn sneered right back at him. Hell yeah, I do. We feed them, and suddenly we're staring down 100 pirates. You may be the king of the East, Krieg, but you're still just one man with a few pistols. Krieg's angry expression intensified for a second before dropping. He chuckled a little. Maybe, but the question isn't how many I kill, but who I kill. He aimed his right pistol at a young woman holding onto a man who had came here to propose to her. His other weapon aimed into the gaggle of men in kitchen uniforms. Is anyone here that big a hero? Surprisingly, no one wanted to step forward. Well, except Luffy, who was struggling in vain as he was kept hidden behind the cooks and guests. Usop covering his loud mouth shut, while a dozen men plus Zoro weakly managed to keep him from starting a massacre. Jin moaned from his down position while Sanji shifted the injured man off of him. I'm sorry. I never thought he'd do something like this when his life was on the line. AGH. He yelled in pain from a kick to the side from Patty. That's what you get for underestimating your captain's scruples. And where do you think you're going, Mr. Let's Feed Double-Cross Krieg? The burly man barked at Sanji, who was heading towards the kitchen. The cook turned back to look at Patty. He gazed up at the sign over the door which said kitchen, staff only in bold italics, then back at Patty. The bathroom. Veins bulged all across Patty's scalp, making more than a few people turn away to keep down their lunch. Don't give me that hogwash. What possible reason do you have to go into the kitchen now? Get the food ready for Krieg's crew. Duh. Gasp. Click, 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 click. Coli. Tap, tap, thud. Come on, work, you stupid ... Ah, there we go. Click, click, click. Sanji took another deep breath of nicotine. His progression to the kitchen halted with the sudden appearance of a number of rather old and ill-kept flintlock pistols being pointed at his head. The cooks holding the guns ranging from clearly unwilling to fire since holding the pistol with both hands couldn't hold it steady, to very eager to put a bullet through his skull and look damn good doing based on the cocky way the one in front of him was putting a hand on his hip and looking away. "Krieg's pet, are we, Sanji?" said the one with his hand on his hip, slowly rotating the pistol 90 degrees to the left. "We knew you were trouble right from the start. We won't let you take a step near the kitchen to help scum like him. And who the FK gave you the authority to decide who you could cook for?" Everyone was at the very least surprised at the blonde Cyclops' blunt question. Even Luffy had stopped struggling against everyone to watch the interesting development. The cooks did not lower their arms while Sanji explained himself. "We're not pirates. We're not marines. We're not government, police, or any kind of people whose job it is to choose what's right and what's wrong. We're cooks, nothing more and nothing less. And as cooks, it's our duty to do one thing and one thing only: feed people." The Straw Hats listened intently, as did the rest of the Baratie. "Sure, I know what Krieg's crew is gonna do when they get their strength back. But as a cook, I will never deny food to somebody who asks for it, no matter who that person may be. What exactly is wrong with that?" A hammer blow to the back of the head told Sanji exactly what Patty thought of his moving little speech. "Tie this lowlife up," he commanded his fellow crew members, thoroughly disgusted with the younger man's actions. "There's a difference between not caring about right and wrong and being royally stupid. I didn't make a fuss the last 50 times if feed penniless bums, but this time we've gone too far." From out of hammer space, Patty pulled out a giant metal prawn. "Couldn't make that up if I was Yashio bloody Sawai ... and aimed it at Krieg, who, keep in mind, was still holding 2 loaded guns with one actually pointing at Patty yet had not fired in all the time it had taken the cook to pull out a weapon and heft it in his direction. "You want food, Krieg? Then choke on this." "Can't believe I said that, EBIAKAHIYAKI. The squint-eyed man barely recoiled from the incredible force of the cannon fire. Smoke billowed out of his weapon and an explosive sphere colored like its namesake hurtled towards the pirate admiral, who, while looking confident, was really just shocked by the ridiculous weapon to even realize what was happening until his form went up in fire and smoke. The explosion sent him hurtling back into the heavy doors which, since they didn't open the way, they were torn of their hinges to let the flaming mass pass. "Boss, guess who said that?" Patty moaned miserably. "Damn, I busted the door. Zeph's gonna have me own akahiyaki for this." Karn waved him off. "Relax. You were defending the restaurant. If anything, Zeph will probably give you a raise." The chefs were silent for a moment before bursting out with laughter. "Hey, where is Zeph anyway?" noticed one of the fighting cooks. Sanji, who was now fitted with a rope straitjacket, had a pretty good idea, but didn't say anything about it. "So what are you planning for those guys on Krieg's boat?" Karn grinned like a cat in Wonderland. "I was thinking Flamby, ha ha ha." "Sounds good," an all-too-familiar voice replied. Ice ran up the cooks' backs. They turned back to the doorway and watched in horror when the smoldering lump in it got back to its feet, patting the few small flames left out and looking no worse for wear. Don Krieg stood at his full height, his expensive fur coat and ugly shirt now just tatters at his feet, revealing an unscorched and dent-free armored chest, a fur cape behind him billowing in the slight wind. "URP, that had to be the worst thing I've ever eaten. All it did was leave ash in my mouth." Luffy, who was feeling rather left out at the moment, decided to give himself at least some dialogue. "Whoa. He's wearing armor." Ordinarily, the sight of a man getting up after being blasted by a cannonball would make men turn tail. But the fighting cooks of Baratie aren't ordinary men. They'll fight tooth and nail until their enemies are either running themselves or part of the menu. They all drew their own weapons. Not satisfied with conventional weaponry, the cooks hefted massive forks, spears that looked like overgrown table knives, and a large spoon that the unfortunate cook would always insist was a club that had been dented so much from crushing pirate skulls that it ended up cutlery shape. "Come on, men. So what if he's armored? It's only one man." "Charge," Krieg growled. "They dare still try to attack him." It was such ... such ... insolence. 4 seconds. In only 4 seconds, every cook that had dared challenge Krieg suddenly jerked back as hot lead peppered them, sending each man as well as 1 or 2 nearby customers to the floor in complete agony. Those not on the floor, writhing in pain, stared up at Krieg. His armor had opened up all over, each hidden compartment revealing twin-barrel pistols poised to mow down everything in front of them. "Never ... and I mean never defy me. I am the undisputed king of the East. I have the strength of 100 men." He flexed his armored biceps and hit his metal chest. "The strongest woot steel armor money can buy." A clicking sound filled the air and everyone knew his guns were armed again. "More hidden weapons strapped to me than everyone here has in the open." He then flexed his fist, showing a glittering gauntlet encrusted with clear gems and diamond fists to make my blows unstoppable. "I have 5,000 men aboard 50 ships. I am the king. My word is law, and to defy me means death. Keep it up, Krieg. With all the hot air you're spouting, this old hunk of scrap wood may actually rise into the sky." said Zeph, who had came in halfway through Craig's little speech, tossing down a heavy-looking sack which gave off the most delicious smells. Here, food for your entire crew. Chef Zeph, what are you doing? Yelled Karn. That caught the bigger man's attention. Zeph. This old man is Zeph. Chef, this is insane, another cook wailed. Yeah, don't you know what's gonna happen now? Zeph kept his eyes firmly on Krieg. That depends on his remaining crew's spirits. His own crew quieted down. Our remaining. The tall-hatted chef nodded. Don't let his bluster and bravado fool you. I've seen many a man in such a state before, and it always means the same thing. The men moved in. Craig gritted his teeth and Jin actually started crying. It means that the so-called king of the East year was chewed up and spat out by the Grand Line. The chefs murmured amongst themselves. The strongest pirate in this sea couldn't handle the Grand Line. What kind of hell ocean was that place? Krieg was still staring at Zeph, repeating his name under his breath over and over for about half a minute before he snapped back to what was unfortunately reality. Your red shoes, Zeph. The pirate that doubled as his ship's cook, he said with only a small amount of respect in his voice. The former pirate snorted but nodded. Yeah, so what? I'm just a chef exclusively nowadays. Not by choice though, is it? Krieg looked down at the peg where Zeph's leg was once. The mighty red shoes Zeph, whose legendary kicks could shatter granite and leave his footprint in steel, whose legs were soaked in the blood of his enemies, being reduced to slinging second-rate slop to a bunch of stuffed shirts. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. If Zeph was moved in any way by those words, he didn't show it. The rest of the ship, though, had varying levels of surprise to find out that the old dude they served or were served by was once such a notorious man. Sanji looked more angry than surprised. Zeph just shrugged. I could care less if I had either of my legs. So long as I've got my hands, I can cook. That's all that matters to me. If you're trying to get a rise out of me by spouting old stories, then you're doing a lousy job. Which explains why he never used his hands. You went to the Grand Line, right? And you managed to sail those waters for an entire year and survive. If you were any kind of pirate back then, that means you probably wrote a logbook. Give it to me. He held his hand out unexpectedly. Zeph stared at the outstretched hand. Sorry, boy. No can do. Krieg's eyes narrowed dangerously. That book is a testament to the exploits to me and the men who sailed with me. It's as important to me as this ship in my hands. I'd never give it to a blowhard like you. If I have to rip you apart to get it, I will. The pirate admiral bellowed, all his barrels aiming at the head chef of Baratie. The cooks gripped their weapons tighter while the straw hats watched the exchange in manners fitting their personality. Usop cowered under the table while Zoro watched the scene like others would a show. Nami had dismissed herself a while before to use the facilities. Luffy was still standing between the cooks and guests like an idiot. And where do you think you're going? Yelled the man once more before emptying the barrels on his right wrist into another man brave and foolish enough to try and flee, causing more diners to scream in terror. Taking several deep breaths, Krieg calmed down some. I may have fled the Grand Line, but I am still Don Krieg, the strongest pirate in this sea. The only reason I never stood a chance in that place was because I knew next to nothing about it. But with your logbook, your crew, and this ship, that could all change. No way are we becoming pirates, growled Karn, wielding his battle spoon. We're cooks. Just because every other kitchen we worked in said otherwise before they fired us doesn't change that, said nameless cook number 3. The Baratie isn't just our workplace. It's our home, and we ain't turning it over to you. Another wave of hot lead silenced them. You'll do as you're told, snarled Krieg. He'd had quite enough of people not bending over backwards for him for one day. Captain, please. You shouldn't. GAH. Jin tried reasoning with his captain only to be met with a boot to the face. Don't you dare tell me what I shouldn't do, Jin, or I'll tie you to the front of one of the ship's cannons. Krieg said loud enough for everyone to hear. As soon as I get that book, I'll gather more men to go with everyone here. Then I'll sail the full line and find Roger's great treasure, securing my place as the one true pirate king. You couldn't even be the king of a kiddie pool. It seemed to be quite the common occurrence in Baratie. It was either full of people screaming or yelling at the top of their lungs, or it was so quiet that you could hear a fly pass gas. Usually these two events went hand in hand. Someone says something big and dramatic, which is then followed by silence, which is followed by yelling. Luffy moved in front of Zeph and hands on his hips and not showing the smallest amount of fear towards the king of the East, much to Krieg's ire and Jin's awe. What did you say, you little brat? Krieg growled through his teeth. The king to be snorted at the king who was. Did I stutter? I said you could never conquer the Grand Line. You're weak. To everyone's surprise, the massive man didn't look the least bit angry. Ordinarily, you'd expect him to reach over and rip Luffy in half, but Krieg was genuinely stunned at the boy's bluntness. He'd been told he would never win. He'd been told that he was going down. He'd even been told that he was nothing compared to the power of his opponents, all before he'd beaten them down without mercy. What Luffy had just said to him, however, was something entirely different. This wasn't someone who was overconfident about their own power. This was someone who was sure about his lack of power. Do you have any idea who you're speaking to, kid? Craig replied gravely. Luffy grinned. Sure I do. The self-named pirate king whose entire army failed where crews 100 times smaller succeeded. The anger began to creep back onto the massive man's face. You think you know anything about pirates? I've been sailing these waters for a decade just to get where I am. What have you done except wash dishes? Huh? Oh right, the apron. He tossed the offending apron asked. It's just to pay back the old man. My true goal is to become pirate king. Ha 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 ha, you're joking. You're barely even half my size and built like a toothpick. How's a runt like you gonna conquer the line? Luffy grinned easy. I've got my crew. He jabbed a thumb over to the table that Zoro was sitting at and Usop was cowering behind. Ha 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 ha, just two. Ha ha, you're just kids. Going to the Grand Line or to school. Luffy looked offended. Hey, that's not true. I also have 2 more, including him. He pointed back at Sanji who looked offended. Just 4. Kid, I had 5,000 men in my armada aboard 50 ships. And in only 7 days all but the 100 aboard my flagship were wiped out. Uncaring aboard the gasping going around. Luffy once more shrugged. So Gold Roger became pirate king with a crew barely half the size of the one you have left. Krieg aimed his arm right at Luffy's head. Gritting his teeth, he hefted the bag onto his shoulders and turned around. I'm going to go give this food to my men. When I get back I want Zeph's journal. All the valuables in a nice little pile on the table, and everyone ready to submit to becoming my crew. He looked over to the diners who were again inching towards the other exits. And don't try leaving. My old ship might be on its last legs, but the cannons still all work fine. With that he left, letting multiple people slump to the floor in relief. Oh thank Neptune. I thought he'd shoot us. Hardly, said Zeph. Hey, what makes he say that, chef? You saw how trigger happy he was, Patty said. Zeph shook his head. Yeah. I also saw how itchy his trigger finger was. If he could shoot any of those guns he would have turned the boy into cheese 3 times over. That bozo ran out of bullets when he shot at you all last time. You mean? Yeah, he was bluffing, he said, staring at where Krieg had stood. His eyes slowly rotating down towards Jin. You still here? I would have thought you'd have followed Krieg like the loyal little dog you are. Jin recoiled slightly at the jab, but conceded the point. I'm sorry, I didn't think he'd do this. I thought better of him. Relax, boy. You have absolutely no reason to feel guilty. Jin's look of astonishment was matched only by the cook's looks of betrayal. Chef, do you hear yourself? This is the man that brought Krieg here. A man that was saved by that bastard blonde. A meaty finger was pointed at Sanji. The restaurant is gonna be destroyed and we're all about to be coursed into the pirate life. And it's all Sanji's fault. Shut up, you eggplants. Patty backed away from Zeph, as did others. Have you ever been hungry? And I don't mean skipped breakfast kind of hunger. I mean going weeks without a crumb of bread or a drop of drinkable water. It eats away at you in more ways than one. The most powerful of men are reduced to pitiful shells of themselves. And even the most noble can become monsters who are willing to do anything for a single bite. What's your point, chef? Asked Karn, clearly not noticing the old man's forlorn glances at his peg. My point is that any of you who want to keep moaning and whimpering may as well head out the back door. Take a gamble to see if Krieg was bluffing about his cannons like he was his guns. He turned to the now very quiet customers who cowered under the old man's glare. And that goes for you lot too. The cooks looked amongst themselves, relaying messages silently to each other. The sound of straining wood could be heard coming from Patty holding his giant dinner fork. Like we said, the Baratie is our home. Karn backed him up, and no one messes with a man's home. Are you all crazy? Said Jin, his eyes filled with disbelief. You've barely seen what he can do. If you fight, you'll all get slaughtered. And if we don't, we'll be the galley slaves of the biggest stick in the blue. I say we take our chances, said Sanji, pulling out a small tin of tobacco from his pocket and rolling another death stick. I'm a cook, so it's my duty to feed the hungry. But that's as far as it goes. As soon as they're fed, I won't give a rat's ass about them. If your shipmates attack the Baratie, then I won't have any problem pummeling them to grease. Not even you, Jin, he said to the man with the dragon on his back. Sanji, he muttered breathlessly, staring at the younger man before Luffy got his attention. You never did say how your armada was wiped out. You must have been caught in a huge storm or something. Jin looked at him for a moment before he began to shiver uncontrollably, bringing his hands to his head like he had a migraine and resting his elbows on the floor. A storm? I wish we'd gotten off that easy. But the hell we went through was much worse. In all honesty, I don't remember much about the first 6 days. They passed like a dream, and like any dream, I can only remember the faintest parts of them. But the last day, the 7th, was something that'll burn in my mind forever. All I remember before then was sailing along, then ... he appeared. Hey, said Zoro, interest piqued. I still can't believe it. That man, that single man without any provocation, was able to annihilate our entire fleet. Even the normally cool-headed Zoro was blown away by that revelation. No way. How can almost 50 ships be scuppered by one man? Said Sanji without his customary cool. Jin shook even more. As soon as he was on us, we couldn't escape. He breezed through the entire armada effortlessly, turning galleons to timber and killing whole crews with a single move. If a real storm hadn't kicked up and pulled the US away from that massacre, then the flagship would have been dragged into the locker as well. I'm not even sure if anyone else managed to survive that slaughter. I really don't want to remember it, but I know I'll never forget that man. Zoro, who had been following Jin's every word like Nami follows something shiny, practically felt his heart stop at what he said next. That man with the piercing hawk eyes. Clatter, what did you say? Man as a species prides itself on being a cut above the rest of the planet's inhabitants. This is because, unlike, say, a bird or a fish, we are not ruled by our instinct. We are a civilized race of mammals that can carry out any action in a thought-out and dignified manner. Unless we're hungry enough, that is. Then we may be no better than the dogs we leash. The sounds of eating aboard the battle-scarred ship was matched only by sounds that you would think only a dog could make. Men scrambling over each other, shoving one another out of the way, and even spilling blood, all to reach that loaf of bread or shank of meat. They didn't have time for the manners their mothers had beaten into their brains since they were young. They didn't have time to act like humans at all. The only thing they cared about was filing the ravenous holes in their bellies. Ha-ah-woo. The wolves in pirate garb gave one last final united howl to signal the return of their humanity. Eyes dull in every sense of the word, filled once again with human intellect, wiping away droll and dirt from their faces and managing to stand upright. I feel great, cheered one pirate who seconds before had been praying to whatever deities he could think of. Su-gu-wad. Another patted his slightly distended stomach and looking like he was in nirvana. I thought that trip to the Grand Line would have killed us for sure. Frag watched his replenished crew with a victorious grin. I'm so glad you're all feeling better, because I don't plan to wait long to go back. The cheers and joyful crying halted immediately. The most feared crew in the east slowly turned to their captain and sincerely hoped he was joking. CC Captain. Frag didn't like the looks his men were giving him. Is that cowardice I see? He pointed a pistol at a random subordinate. Wait a knack. Krieg's crew was reduced to 99. He was glad he remembered to reload his guns before handing over the food. He looked around his remaining crew. Anyone else still afraid? The pirates looked at each other for a few seconds before raising their arms and letting out a completely genuine and totally not forced cheer. If Craig saw it as otherwise, then he really didn't care. Good. No, then on to more current matters. He stood up, deliberately drawing close to his men to show of his full impressive height. He pointed towards the fish-shaped ship they were floating next to. You see that boat? One crew member nodded. Hey, yeah. Isn't that the berry something? The floating restaurant. Craig nodded and smiled wickedly. Not many would think that a ship that stupid looking would be filled with pirates ready to rob them blind. That statement also had the dual purpose of measuring the intellect of his crew. He calculated his crew's IQ in direct contrast to how quickly their faces changed to show they got it. Bang, down to 98. A smart pirate was a disobedient one. Zoro was bordering on livid and ecstatic. Johnny had lied to him about Hawkeye's Mihawk eating here. Either that or had confused him with a flaming drunkard the cooks called Red Eyes. On the upside, though, he had gained some measure of the legendary fighter's skill. Taking down 49 ship's crew and all with little visible effort gave him at least some clue as to how big a gap there was between him and his target. He didn't like it. Luffy, on the other hand, couldn't be happier at the news. If everyone was as strong as this Mihawk guy in the Grand Line, then he should have no trouble finding adventure. The armed men aboard the Baratie tensed as they heard their soon-to-be opponents draw closer. The sound of yelling and running echoing off of the walls. What few men, brave customers brave enough to stand among the fighters, did do after being handed whatever weapons they had spare, including one boy brave and foolish enough to try impressing a gaggle of girls who had been very underwhelmed by their current partner's lack of courage. The yelling and thumping grew louder and louder, inaudible murmuring becoming words that they could understand. Out of the way. Move, you lousy cooks. I don't want to die. Weapons and fists fell limply to everyone's side at the sound of the pirates screaming in terror. One was about to say aloud what everyone was thinking until an even louder sound accompanied them. ZZZIIINNNGGG. Krieg's flagship, a vessel more than twice the size of Baratie, was bisected. A single wave of air no thicker than a sheet of paper effortlessly cleaved through the wood and metal, leaving a clean cut on either side, smoother to the touch than marble. The boat bobbed for a few seconds. Like a man in shock, it was almost as if it wasn't sure what had happened to it. Then when it finally did, the ship began to warp. Planks pulling every which way, and the cannon near the bisection began to crush itself until the balls inside could not handle the strain. Boom. That explosion was followed by another, and another, and another, until the half-and-half vessel was flaming timber, being reduced to flotsam and jetsam smoldering on the waves, oddly enough not sinking for some reason. The cooks barged their way outside, falling over each other till every man was on deck. Everyone, even the normally stoic Zoro and fearless Luffy, were gaping at the sight. What are you eggplants all gawking at? Weigh anchor before all that commotion capsizes us, yelled Zeph, making his cooking crew spring into action to stop everyone from drowning. Luffy bolted as soon as what had happened filtered through his dense skull. Luffy, where do you think you're going? No way was Usop letting someone as strong as his captain leave him too. I mean, he needed his subordinate here to defend the helpless civilians inside the restaurant. Johnny and Yasaku are still on Mary, he called back, prompting his other present crewmates following behind. Brother Luffy, help. Brother Zoro, save us. Luffy's worst fears were confirmed. Where once the two bounty hunters and his ship had been was just now the two bounty hunters, thrashing about in the violent waters trying to climb onto a ship too high to do so. Luffy looked around. No sign of Mary. He prayed that it wasn't planning on joining Krieg's ship. Guys, what happened to Mary? The two bounty hunters looked at each other, then cried out, Brother Nami stole it. WWHHAATT. Usop and even Zoro felt their legs buckle along with their eardrums from Luffy's cry. The wooden banister under their captain's fingers reduced to wood pulp in an instant. How could Nami just steal the ship? You two are swordsmen, for crying out loud, Zoro demanded of his old friends. Johnny and Yasaku quieted down, looking from left to right nervously while bobbing against the sea. She displayed an unparalleled skill with a bow staff and knocked us of the boat, Yasaku answered robotically. Indeed, though we fought with great valor, it soon became apparent that she was to the staff what Brother Zoro is to the sword. We stood no chance, agreed Johnny, just as red-faced as his partner. They couldn't look the minty-haired teen in the eye. Usop jumped up on the banister and peered out over the settling sea, just barely managing to make out a small ship on the horizon. Well, given that these two are still floundering about, she couldn't have set off that long ago. But given the wind, even if we could set off now, she'd have a good few hours head start. Zoro, dive in and fish those two out, ordered Luffy. Zoro nodded. He dived into the sea and with minimal effort tossed his companions up onto deck before jumping back on himself. We need a boat to go after her, stated the captain. Since Krieg didn't let any of the guests leave, that means that they still have some lifeboats left. Zoro grunted and shook his head. Forget about it. Like Usop said, by the time we can leave, she'll be long gone. Best just get a new ship. The sniper was indignant. Hey, I didn't say we shouldn't go after her. That boat's got all my stuff on it. The boat doesn't matter, Luffy said. The four guys looked at his oddly. We can always get another boat. But Nami is the only person I want as my navigator, he declared boldly. He didn't give them time to react. He picked Yasaku and Johnny up to their feet and addressed them. I need you two along with Usop and Zoro to chase after my navigator. You think you can do that? SS Suri, said Yasaku uncertainly. Luffy curtly nodded and looked at his crewman with a serious expression. One that said, you're doing this. Zoro didn't have the patience nor Usop the guts to argue with it and just followed after the other two. Zoro stopped in my stride. You coming? And leave that creep to these guys. He grinned, which Zoro mimicked before running off. Or at least he would have if he hadn't caught sight of a peculiar little boat bobbing in the waves. The cooks were aghast at the sheer devastation they were witnessing. The Krieg pirates scrambled wherever they were. Those who had managed to survive the ship's detonation on larger pieces of scrap wood attempted to hide themselves. Others on smaller pieces on in the water already tried going under, which worked for about 10 seconds before they remembered they couldn't breathe water. Some even tried to climb onto the Baratie but were viciously kicked away by the staff. Krieg himself had said he had 100 hungry men on his ship. No one could see more than 50. How could this have happened, said Patty without a breath in his voice. The ship may have been done for, but it didn't look like it was gonna break in two like that. It wasn't, said Zeph while moving through the crowd towards the front. It didn't break. The weapons on board might have detonated and finished the job, but that galleon was split in two. As split, cried Karn, cowering behind the swordsman. As in cut. How is that possible? The elder man looked through a cloud of smoke coming from one of the few pieces left dry, a figure becoming more visible by the second through it. Why don't you ask the one who did it? He pointed at the shape in the smoke. His form appeared in the black mist like the vampire of legend, his long black and crimson staying completely still despite the breeze that pushed his coffin-shaped boat forward. A black wide-brimmed feathered hat obscuring everything above his nose, showing facial hair styled so sharply that you could cut yourself on his pointed goatee, which lightly brushed against his bare chest, adorned by only a small cross. Light rhythmic breathing showing he was currently asleep, while the black sword with the crucifix-shaped guard as wide as the blade was long kept him sitting straight. The Krieg pirates sweated bullets as the man drifted towards them. And that was before he woke and lifted his head. Then everyone bar who you would expect not to hit the brown note. There are a lot of ways to describe these kind of eyes, and I mean lot. Hawkeye's was far from Jurikul Mihawk's only epitaph, just his most widely used one. There were about 30 different ones based on his eyes alone. Hawkeye Mihawk, Demon Eye Mihawk, Jurikul of the All-Seeing Eye were the most popular. It was just the way the man looked at you with his sharp yellows with their perpetually shrunken irises bored into your mind, searching every part of you until their owner knew everything about you at a glance, robbing you of your very soul. Him, Patty said in a seemingly confused voice, if only to hide the sheer terror he was experiencing. How could one man sink 49 ships all on his lonesome? That ship ain't big enough to carry a weapon that could do that. Zeph pointed at the religiously themed blade. His special weapon is strapped to his back. A sword? How could a blasted swordsman just cut up an armada? Zeph crossed his arms. You're only thinking of him as an ordinary human being. That man is one of the biggest sharks in the most dangerous ocean. He is Jurikil Mihawk, the greatest swordsman alive. One man aboard the wreckage was apparently immune to the all-consuming powers of Mihawk's gaze. Whether this was because he was too stupid to be scared or that he didn't have a soul to begin with wasn't all that clear, but it made this nameless grunt stand up and address the deadly man. Damn you, you sadistic monster. It was bad enough you start killing us for no reason. But why did you have to follow us all the way here? The swordsman tilted his head and looked over, clearly mulling over what he should say and if he should really bother answering. Ultimately decided he gave his answer. Because you woke me up. Not the best excuse for mass genocide. Or at least that's what the grunt that looked kind of like Usop thought when he pulled out both pistols and discharged him at the man. Clang thunk. Weapons fell from slack fingers and mouths fell open from slack jaws. In the time it took the bullets to travel the merest distance between point and B, Mihawk had taken out his massive sword and moved it into the path of the oncoming fire. But instead of blocking it with the flat or even slashing forward and cutting them like other less skilled masters would, he swept his sword from left to right. Catching the shots with the tip of the sword, he gently nudged the speeding metal to the right and the other shot to the left, making both of them drastically veer of course from their intended target, instead embedding themselves in someone else, reducing the crew by 2 more. The shooter blinked, stared at his guns, then back at the man who was resheathing his weapon. What the hell? How could you miss? He's not even 20 yards away, for crying out loud, growled another faceless drone. He didn't miss, answered Zoro, who had miraculously appeared behind Krieg's pirates. It's just that Hawkeye was able to make your rounds change course with his sword. He ignored the gun-toting grunt's rude request for his name. It's hard enough to deflect a bullet, but to actually control its path. I've never seen such subtle skill before. Mihawk heard every word and was impressed by the young man's own keen eyes. Without subtlety, a sword is little more than an iron bar. Zoro couldn't help the Luffy-class idiotic grin that sprouted on his face. You're everything your reputation says you are. The greatest swordsman who ever lived. A useless title, but fitting nonetheless, agreed Black Blade Mihawk. I can tell by the grin on your face that you're more than just impressed by my skill, boy. What is it you want? Zoro's grin widened further. He took several big steps back and unsheathed Watto, your title. You look bored, so what say we have a match? It was like a guppy challenging a sea king. Not something you see every day, and were rendered speechless when it did. Both of these men were fear warriors in their own right. Zoro's 3 swords had just now alerted the pirates as to who he was, making them dive off for the next largest bit of wreckage. While Mountain Cleaver Mihawk made even Luffy calm down to watch the impending fight. Luffy, yelled his sniper behind him. The passenger boat drifting away from the Baratie while everyone else was occupied. We don't have time for this. If we don't leave right now, Nami's going to be out of sight. Luffy heard him just fine. He just didn't care. Mihawk stared up at Zoro from his seated position, never moving a muscle as his boat eerily drew closer, docking against what used to be Krieg's deck without any effort from its owner and remaining completely still despite having to rope or anchor to secure its position. Weak, Jurikil said, stepping out of his boat and standing about 20 feet from his opponent. It goes without saying that you're the mosquito who dares to challenge the elephant here. I can easily tell that you know I am much stronger than you, yet you insist on fighting me. Do you have some sort of hidden power? Or are you really just that ignorant? Zoro grunted and put his sword in his mouth, still completely understandable despite this. Neither. I know I have no chance against you right now, but my ambition is to beat you. I made this as a promise to a friend, and I refuse to back out of it. Admirable ... if suicidal. He uncrossed his arms. Nami stood aboard the deck of her ship, smiling an impossible smile that showed both happiness and immense grief. I'm sorry, she whispered out towards the direction of those she betrayed. I'm so sorry. The world seemed to stand still just as the 2 combatants did. The waters grew still. Birds overhead landed to watch the oncoming battle along with everyone else. Pirate, cook, passenger, it didn't matter. To see 3-sword Zoro and Crusader Jurikil was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Zoro stood at the ready, all 3 of his weapons unsheathed. Opposite him, Mihawk still stood with his arms at his sides. Well, Zoro said a little impatiently, bring out your sword already. Mihawk sighed a little. If you insist. He pulled out his weapon, but instead of reaching for his back, he reached for the cross around his neck and tugged at it, pulling out a knife not even 5 inches long. You could imagine how Zoro must have felt. Are you kidding? Hardly. I'm not someone who uses a cannon to hunt rabbits, which is exactly what you are, child. You may very well be the strongest swordsman of the East, but being the greatest anything of the East is a pitiful fallacy of a reputation. Zoro glared as Mihawk continued his verbal beatdown. Of all the oceans, the Red Line and Grand Line divides this world into the East. Blue is the absolute weakest. That armored dolt over there learned it the hard way. He looked over at Craig, who involuntarily shuddered under Mihawk's gaze despite the man being so far he could hardly make out the man's face. I'm sorry to say that this is my smallest knife. If you do well enough, I may have to upgrade to a butter knife. You sure are cocky for a man that's about to die. Zoro leapt at his opponent, his swords angled to lop the dandy man's head clean from his shoulders. O-N-I-G-G-I-I-R-R-I-I. He swung at him with fierce enough to carve through rock. Victory in one blow. Clang! The vibrations ran up his arms and through his aching mouth and down towards his boots. He had put as much strength as he had, enough to smash through granite into that attack. Yet all it took Island Splitter Mihawk to stop it was a pocket knife held between his thumb, his index and his ring finger. The teen swordsman groaned while trying with all his might to push forward. But as hard as he tried, he couldn't budge an inch under the seemingly non-existent effort of Jurikul Mihawk. I can't move. I knew I couldn't win. But our difference can't be this vast. No way. He jumped back from the knife wielder only to jump right back, arms swinging. He swung as fast as he could, as unpredictably as he could. Not even he was all that sure which way he was attacking half the time. His arms were reduced to blurs and his blades to flashes of reflected sunlight. But for all his skill, he was shocked to see Mihawk keeping pace with him, and considering that he was swinging 3 weapons almost past the visible spectrum while the plume-hatted man was keeping pace with only one. A new epitaph sprung to his mind for him. Godspeed, Mihawk. I won't accept it. I won't accept sure complete defeat. His thoughts turned to the past. Memories of a beautiful girl with unsurpassed skill filling his mind. Promises to each other that were dashed before they destroyed before they could be fulfilled. And another being born from grief that not even this monster before him could break. Mihawk parried strike after strike with all the skill it took a boy to swat a fly. More intrigued by Zoro's expression than Watto coming within inches of puncturing his famous eyes. What is it that drives you? What makes you pick a fight you know you can't win? His knife flashed forward with even greater speed, the flat catching Zoro in the face with a force that sent him hurtling back into what used to be Craig's cabin wall. Luffy had to grab the back of Yosaku and Johnny's coat and threw them to the floor. This was Zoro's goal and no one had the right to interfere. He coughed harshly, a glob of blood spewing out and staining his white shirt. He pulled both swords behind the left side of his back and crouched. Mihawk raised his trinket again. Boy, don't be foolish. Tiger. Pathetic. Hunt. Sklitch. What? What was everyone looking at? Zoro wondered why everyone watching the fight was suddenly looking at him like something horrible had just happened. He'd taken down Mihawk, of course. How else could he have attacked the man without taking a hit? Did he avoid a hit? It certainly didn't feel like he was hurt. In fact, he'd never felt better. He felt rather cool despite the noon sun beating down on him, even shivering a little. Mihawk looked good too. Boy, for a guy who'd just taken a crippling blow, he looked completely unharmed. But that was impossible. Zoro had attacked him and came out of it uninjured, so that means Hawkeye's had lost. Boy, it was really getting cold. The guy was saying something, but it was really hard to hear him. No matter, he could make it out well enough. Step back before I gut you. Why would he? The world started moving again. And Zoro knew pain. He wanted to cry out, to drop the sword in his mouth, to bellow his mouth and wrench the dagger from his chest. He wanted so much to drop onto the deck, to return to the lucid dream he had just came from. The thing is, though, when you want to do everything, you end up doing nothing. So he just stood there like an idiot with 4.5 inches of steel in between his ribs. I can't back down, he said with blood pouring out of his mouth in little streams. I promise to be the best. If I back down, even even against you, my dreams will die. Mihawk agreed that is defeat. I'll never accept that. I have a blade mere inches from your heart, weakling. I could easily end your life instead. Then do it. I'd prefer death to defeat. He almost dropped in relief when the cross knife was pulled from his insides. Devil Slayer Mihawk clipped his knife back in place and reached for his back. Boy, tell me your name. Roronoa Zoro. He relied, holding his 3 swords in a clockwise windmill stance. A strong name. It's been a long time since I met someone of your level with such brazen courage. He lifted his true weapon from his back, letting Zoro and the rest of those assembled see Kokuto Yoru, the strongest sword in the world. As long as he was tall and with a blade that pulled in as much light as the Straw Hat Captain himself. The greatest of the supreme grade swords. As a reward, I will let you face this sword in an instant of my true skill. Zoro grinned and pulled his hands together. He started exchanging his weapons between his hands, faster and faster in a circular pattern until the rapid spinning made them look like a buzzsaw. Wind started blowing from them like an industrial strength fan. Distortions in the air visible for all to see. Santoryu hidden technique. Mihawk drew back. One shouldn't call out their attack names. Then charged straight at the younger man. Zoro did the same. 3,000 worlds. Die. Revised. The met. They broke. He lost. Zoro looked at the handles which had once been his 2 other weapons. Nameless blades he'd picked up from somewhere he really didn't care about remembering, but still made of steel which Jurikul hadn't just cut through, but utterly shattered. He knew he wouldn't win, but this was the last straw needed to make it really sink in. No use avoiding the inevitable. He stood back up and turned around, his arms as far apart as possible. Warlord Mihawk was puzzled for one of the few rare occasions in his life. "What are you doing?" Zoro still smiled. "A man doesn't take a coward's wound, especially not a swordsman." Not even stone-faced Mihawk could hold back his own S&T-eating grin. "Magnificent. Sklitch. Blood followed in the winds that the sword generated, spraying as far as a half-mile away from the body it used to circulate when the world's greatest swordsman cut him from shoulder to hip. He hung for a moment before falling back and crashing into the sea. "Brother." His old comrades dived in after him in the hopes they wouldn't be too late. Luffy, on the other hand, dived for someone else. Wormhole. Forget the sword fight. What really shocked everyone there was when Kai black smoke poured out of the chore boy, speeding towards Jurikul Mihawk like an arrow. Just before contact, the darkness bulged slightly and a pale fist exploded from it, aimed for the mustachioed man's face. A blow which the world's greatest swordsman avoided with ease. Luffy wasn't done. Thick black smoke poured of his body and headed at Mihawk in a wave that blocked the horizon and blotted out the sun. An attack so massive that no one could ever hope to dodge it. That didn't stop Mihawk from cutting through it. Darkness, intangible and unstoppable, tore like cheap cloth when the black blade passed through it, like the sword was eating it. That didn't last long. It was like cutting a river. It kept coming at him without losing pace, every slash only serving to multiply to black tendrils racing towards him, pushing him further and further back, never growing closer or further than a few inches away from hitting him. "Impressive. I certainly didn't expect a Logia user here," commented Mihawk while cutting away at it, blackness trying to swallow his left leg. "Of course you fight like almost every other Logia user I've ever encountered, hoping to overwhelm me with sheer force." Those words were rendered moot when Luffy once more burst from the black shroud with a haymaker that Mihawk barely avoided. This boy and his crewmate were just full of surprises. "If you're worried about your swordsman," he said, making the boy stop his next charge, "you need not worry. I made sure not to kill him. I despise weakness, but I despise wasted talent even more." Yasaku pulled his sworn brother from the drink, checking his chest, and was relieved on so many levels that his chest continued to rise and fall steadily. That smiling face was all Luffy needed to see to know that his swordsman was all right. "Hear me roar, Noah Zoro. Now is not your time to die," Mihawk shouted out, totally destroying any quiet mystery he might have had. "You have only started your journey. Discover yourself. Discover your power and live to surpass me." He turned back to Luffy. "With a crewman of such ambition, I imagine you share such lofty goals." With a rare serious look, he nodded back. "I'm going to be Pirate King." He smirked, sending yet more spine-tingling indeed. To find those who still dream at this late in the Golden Age is rare indeed. With a flutter of his coat, he turned back to return to his boat, leaving a puzzled captain wondering what he meant. He didn't have long to wonder, though, since Usop's ear and brain-piercing cry broke his eardrum. "Luffy. He's alive, barely breathing, missing 7/10 of his blood, and has a cut deep enough to kill a giant, but nonetheless alive. Functioning even as shown when he lifted Wado high into the air. Mihawk." The man listened intently. "From now until we face each other again, no matter how long it takes, until I become the greatest swordsman alive, I will never lose again. That okay with you, O Pirate King?" "Kashishi, not at all." Mihawk put his sword back in place. It wasn't every day that one from the Demon Sea was surprised in the East Blue of all places. Today was a good day. "I hope, Straw Hat, that we cross paths again someday." Bang, ba, bang, bang. Several bullets headed straight at the man, all of which were avoided in a blur. Krieg sneered and pressed a plate of his armor, reloading all his hidden barrels. "Damn, you really are a cut above the rest," the Armada leader said with a voice that made it sound like he'd already won. "What's the matter, Pigeon Eyes? Didn't you want to take my head and collect my reward?" Hawkeyes stared at the man, making said man quake a little on the inside when he felt a hole burning through his skull. "If I'd wanted small change, I could find any number of weaklings closer to home with bounties far exceeding yours. This chase was just for amusement. And now I am satisfied. I'll take my leave." "Weakling, I'll show you a weakling. Die." All his barrels fired. Krief was apparently a very slow learner. Jurikul agreed. He pulled out Klahadore again and cut down on the waterfront, creating a massive column of water that blocked everything from view and forcing both Krieg and Luffy to find new footing. When it subsided, Warlord Jurikul Mihawk was nowhere to be seen. The surge the eruption created, Usop's boat carrying the bounty hunter's active informer, was carried further out against the passenger's will. "Luffy, help," the coward called back, his captain once more vanishing in black smoke only to reappear back on Baratie. Usop set sail. "I'll catch up when I repay my debt." Needlenose wouldn't have argued even if he didn't already agree with him. He just told him to be quick about it and sailed off after the traitor. Luffy turned his attention from his retreating crew back to Krieg, who was dragging himself onto yet another decent-sized piece of wreckage that had somehow not sunk yet. He looked back towards the cooks, half of whom were missing due to Zeph instructing them to help the remaining guests flee out back on their boats. They were standing their ground well enough, but the boy could see the fear they had at risking their lives. It wasn't hard for even him to put two and two together ... if the answer was fish. Okay, I kid. Hey old man, he addressed Mega Stash Man. If I take out these guys, can you call of our debt? The chef huffed, call it off. Kid, you take care of these guys, I'll call it off. Give you Sanji for your crew and give you a lifetime's pass to eat here for free. 3, 2, 1. YAMI The tidal wave of darkness sprung once more from the boy, branching off in every which way. One of the men who had seconds before about to attack the restaurant on fear of death were trying to escape. Some were swallowed by the great mass, while those being chased by the smaller branching tendrils were grabbed by the pencil-thin lines, which then flowered to consume them and mute their shrieks of terror. If there was anything more important to Luffy than the words Pirate King, it was free food. Krieg watched in abject horror at the sight of his crew being picked off one by some devil freak. The arrogant man in crest demanded he fight this boy to prove he was the strongest in the East. But the smart man in him realized he'd have to do something, or else he'd be pulled into that creeping darkness like his men were. He was down to 25 already. The bullets some were firing were consumed as instantly as they were. And Mihawk's sword must be something else, because all slashing at it did for normal humans was get them pulled in quicker. He could barely make out the boy clinging to the Baratie, his head moving about parallel to the next man being pulled in. So the kid has to be able to see what he's doing, huh? Not good when your power blots out everything. Now he just has to. He blacked out before the next thought entered his head. Well ... that was incredibly easy. 20 seconds. That's how long it took Luffy to absorb the entire remnant of Krieg's armada. Just 20 seconds. The boy smiled wide. He definitely managed to recover most of his strength after his burnout on Usop's island. Now to just get Sanji in. Why are you all staring at me like that? Everyone, even Jin, who he'd grabbed and dragged onto the deck, was giving him a death glare, making him feel mere inches tall. Do it right, said Patty slowly. What? Karn answered this time. Krieg. And that big shiny guy who looked strong. Spit them out and fight for real. Again what? Zeph stepped forward. You can't just end the fight in half a minute. That cheats everyone who's been waiting all this time to see a royal smackdown between you and Krieg. A chance for Sanji to prove how strong he is, and to give Jin a reason to question why he's loyal to that mutton-chopped idiot. Do I have to? Glare. Sigh. Release. The two aforementioned men were spat out of the smock like bullets, skipping on the water's surface one or twice before crashing nearby. He cracked his knuckles loudly and popped his neck. Well, looks like I have to do this the hard way. Krieg gasped for air, clutching his armored chest and staring at the wreckage he was floating on. What was that place? A massive world full of nothing except those blubbering infants that used to be my crew. His armor was totaled. The nigh impenetrable Woot's steel had been crushed like a tin can, pressing tightly against his broad chest and making it very hard for him to breathe. Though not hard at all for someone with superhuman strength to simply rip off. He peeled the steel from himself and in a decisive move flung it as hard as he could at the Straw Hat Boy, who immediately jumped out of the way just as the speeding metal demolished the section where he'd been standing a moment ago. Krieg wasn't out of ammo though. His bracers, barrels, anything he could grab was thrown at the boy, forcing Cooks to scatter, and thanks to Krieg's quick wit forcing Luffy to make a final leap onto yet another small floating piece of debris which for whatever reason hadn't yet sank. Just as Krieg intended. Let's see how strong you are at the bottom of the sea, he bellowed, and with a mighty roar grabbed onto a large piece of protruding mast, ripping it from where it was bolted and launched it like a spear. Luffy jumped again, his leg strength more than enough to manage such small distances. However, that left the wooden pole to rocket towards the Baratie with enough mass and force behind it to demolish a good part of the ship. It's gonna scuttle the ship, screamed Patty, taking a dive out of the way along with the rest. Sanji, Prek, Red Leg Zeph wasn't just known for being a great cook. In his prime he was known for being able to take anything down with a sweep of his legs. Desperation had claimed that which he was feared for, but fate had delivered him something in exchange. A boy who not only had a passion for food, but a chance for Zeph to pass on his style so that it would not die. The result was about as good as you expected. The mass splintered under the tip of Sanji's shoe, the speeding log cracking at the middle since the tip was now trying to veer in a direction that the rest of it didn't want to go in. Cracks ran up the entire length of the wood until the entire mast fragment was turned into wood chips raining about the Baratie crew like brown rain, causing several splinters in the saucer-sized eyes and wide-open mouths, but otherwise fine. Luffy whistled. Now he really wanted this guy on his crew. Sanji landed back on deck with feline grace, not a hair out of place or a flake of ash fallen from his death stick. I didn't think pirate fought by just throwing things, he commented a little too loudly. No one was really that mused though, especially since most were sporting large amounts of pointy timber on their tongues. TTHHANTHI. The burly armed fry cook grabbed his lapels while glaring a hole through him. Karn held his spoon close to his neck. Thia on a tillo. Karn growled past his wooden tongue. Shut up. A voice said right before the two were sent careening into the side of the boat. A third man climbed up on deck, snapping and scrapping against everything with the massive shield covering his entire body. The smaller shield strapped to his knees, elbows and shins bumping against things with every step. If this is our new ship, then we'll definitely need to do something about the room, the man said, towering over the downed Sanji. So you think you're pretty strong, huh? Let's see how hard you can kick when you're up against Pearl the invincible wall. Sanji really didn't consider this guy to much of a threat, especially with that goofy bulbous helmet he had on. But Zeph was a good judge for this sort of thing, so that meant he was probably strong. You're breaking the ship. He dragged the cigarette down to the tip in one breath, before launching at Pearl with one leg extended right for his face. Thoom! Another water spout erupted. Yet more wood sent beneath the drink with every clash between the super strong combatants. Ordinarily, Krieg wouldn't be caught dead in a fist fight unless he was out of weapons. However, his attempts to take this brat down with his pauldron hidden stake machine gun had failed miserably when they were sucked into that evil place the boy sent him to. Though from what he'd seen, he seemed to restrain himself when he looked ready to pull him back in. With that in mind, Krieg decided to use his indestructible diamond fists to beat the boy into a bloody smear, never expecting him to be able to match him in raw strength. He was right. Well, almost right. Krieg was just barely stronger than Luffy in pure physical power. And though the Don was big, he was by no means slower. For every one rib-cracking blow the newbie slammed into him, he got in one or two bone-jarring hits of his own. Luffy ducked under a clumsy swing from the man not used to straight-up brawling and launched himself into his stomach, forcing the air out of his stomach. Catching himself in a handstand, he pushed up and wrapped his legs around the older man's neck, squeezing in a powerful sleeper hold that would snap a thinner man's neck while simultaneously hammering his free fist into Krieg's stomach again. Krieg coughed up blood and what little air he had left in him. He could see black dots forming quickly in his eyes, but not quick enough to stop his sending both armored rows of knuckles into Luffy's unprotected sides while he still had his fist in his gut. AGH, Luffy screamed, his weakness to pain increasing the already crippling blow's effect and forcing him to unlock his legs. Krieg immediately grabbed his right leg with both hands and started whipping him around. Time to learn to swim. He flung the boy out into the sea. Back on Baratie, as was barely any better for Sanji. Pearl's shields were far too smooth and well-polished to get anything short of an all-out direct hit on without his kicks sliding off. He couldn't even build a stronger attack, which took precious seconds that his opponent wasn't willing to give him. He'd been forced to lead the battle inside the restaurant, which was now devoid of customers. Told you, the eternally boastful Pearl said to the panting cook. 60-plus battles without a single scratch. You can kick till your legs break, but I'll still be standing when everything's over. The cook groaned and stood back up. I hate guys like you. What? You mean stronger, better looking and completely invincible? No, fat, stupid and big-headed. Fat. I'll crush you with a fist like polished silver. The man thrust a huge pearl-covered shield at Sanji, who evaded it despite its surprising speed. That it. His leg lashed out to strike at Pearl's unguarded side only to be blocked. Can't hit me. Pearl backhanded at Sanji, who narrowly dodged again by diving to the floor and sweeping Pearl's feet out from under him. The man fell to earth with a heavy thud. Neither can you. You might be strong, but that stupid shield makes you about as graceful as rampaging bull. His legs swung high above his head before crashing down on Pearl's face with a wadium, sending a shockwave through the hardwood floor. He lifted his foot, noting with some disdain that he had a few spots of red on his shoes. He wasn't particularly fond of Zeph's old nickname and hated to get anything on his shoes. He grabbed the turtle man by his oversized guard and started to pull him out of the restaurant, until a hand gripped his ankle. Who needs grace? Clang. Krieg stared after the diminishing form of Luffy carefully. Reaching for his shoulder gun again, he pulled to a canister and attached it to the gun's nozzle, pointing it right at the boy until he actually saw him go in the sea, grinning wickedly when he saw a splash. That kid's done for. Those who eat the devil fruit are completely helpless underwater. He turned about face and aimed his weapon at the Baratie, causing Jin to stand up in horror. Don Krieg, don't. You don't need to kill them. Krieg smirked. I know. He called back. Just as long as they agree to serve me as my new crew, I'll spare all your lives. The cooks were frozen in place, not one of them stupid enough to believe that the pirate wouldn't fire if they dared try and escape. Good. Now Jin, break that old failures peg so he doesn't try anything. Warily Jin did as he was asked. The old man didn't put up any fight. He just went to his knees, staring at the pirate when he snapped the wood. Don't look at me like that. I'm a pirate. I follow my captain's orders. Zeph still stared. So was I, but unlike your precious Don, my men didn't follow me because they were afraid I'd kill him. Shut up. He pulled out a weird-looking double-barreled shotgun and jammed it against Zeph's head, much to Krieg's amusement. Ha ha ha, well done, Jin. As expected from my first mate. Clang. Huh. And just as expected from my second mate. Nice work, Pearl. Pearl walked out of the restaurant, Sanji's head in his right hand dragging the rest of him along. He tossed Sanji against the guard railing where he retched violently when his back hit the hard wood. He fell to his knees. He tried standing up until Krieg's voice rang out again. Jin, if that blonde nitwit even as much as moves, I want you to blow Zeph's head off. Don't question me, Jin. The pirate looked back down at the former one, who was still looking up at him. It made him feel like a little boy who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Pearl had no such feelings of guilt. He sneered and came further out the restaurant, banging his shields together, causing a sinister yet somehow pleasant ringing. He stood over Sanji, who had taken not moving under threat of his mentor's death to heart. You heard him, Blondie, move and Jin will blow the old man's head off. He sneered, looming over Sanji and loudly cracking his joints. The cook, panting harshly, looked over at Jin and Zeph, the former staring at him with eyes fully open. He looked over to the cooks, who were all far too frightened to do anything. Go ahead. Clang, 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 clang. It was violence on a level that few ever saw in this world. There was no flash, no spectacular names for what he was doing. He wasn't performing some crazy extravagant maneuver. Pearl was beating him pure and simple. The oversized dandy pulled his fist back and decked him as hard as he could, grinding his shield into the cook's jaw before slowly pulling it back and bringing it forward again. He had a grin like he drank Joker juice, taking joy in every blow that caused further and further turned his weapon into a bloody mess. Clang, nobody dared move, the sight in front of them rendering their legs like jelly. Even Jin felt the gun in his hand go limp before tightening his grip. Pearl ... That's enough, he whispered, only to be ignored by the overzealous pirate, who continued his brutalizing. It continued for who cares how long. An ominous ringing and the occasional gull on board the mast were the only sounds made by anyone, until Krieg raised a hand. All right, Pearl, that's enough. No point beating a corpse. Pearl didn't look like he agreed, but complied anyway, standing up and moving away from the bloody mess, and much to his shock, so did Sanji. The bloodied blonde reached for his tobacco tin again, the case slipping out of his fingers and spilling the contents everywhere. Damn, that was the last of it too. He flung the papers away, seeing no point in them anymore. He looked over in his mentor's direction, Pearl and Jin looking like they hardly expected him to get back up. You call that a beating? Crap, cook over there calls it a love tap. Pearl grit his teeth in anger. Pearl symbols. The two shields came crashing into either side of his head. He was grateful that he was so thick-skulled, because it felt like if he was any less so, then his head would pop like souffle. Sanji. Jin once more almost dropped his gun and rushed to his savior's aid, but a glare from his idol made him remember himself. What's the matter? Krieg's word is law, ain't it? Jin didn't ever bother to respond. Sanji fell to his knees, gasping for life, but did not pass out. He got back to his feet, coughing violently. Now we're up to Patty's love taps. Good for you. Sanji, why aren't you fighting back? Growled Zeph, much to Jin's shock. Just tear this bozo a new one and get this stupid ordeal over with. He shook his bloody head. Can't do that, old man. I fight back and Jin blows your head off. So, I'm an old man, you stupid eggplant. You're not even 20 yet. Do the math. I can't do that, Sanji yelled. This way I can repay you for everything you gave up for me. You've already given up too much. I won't take anything else. Insert Sanji's tale of starvation here. You gave up your leg for me. You gave up your reputation for me. How could I ask you to give up your damn life for me? Haven't I taken enough? Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.